Good evening. If you found your way here tonight, maybe your day's been long. Maybe your mind is still racing a little. Or maybe you just need a voice in the quiet. So, breathe. Let the world slow down, just for a while. Tonight, I'll take you deep into a forest where time doesn't move the way it should. Where someone who wanted to disappear found something that had been waiting. This isn't a story to scare you. Not really. It's a soft tale of silence, of memory, of the kind of hunger that lives under roots and breathes with the trees. So, curl up. Let your eyes grow heavy. And if the woods call to you in your dreams tonight, just remember, not everything that's quiet is safe. Chapter 11. The magnificent curtain of stunned silence lasted only for a moment. Then, the clamor in the arena rose to a new level as people surged forward to look, to speculate, to explain. A mirror. What could it mean? A very good question. Despite being deeply shaken by it, I couldn't immediately form any working theory as to its significance. Sometimes, great art is like that. It strikes you, and you can't explain why. Was it a deep symbolic gesture? An encrypted message? A cry for help? A yearning to be understood? Hard to say. And for me, at that moment, it wasn't the most important thing. I just wanted to feel it. Let impossible. Of course. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The mirror was there for a reason. An important reason. To him, these weren't just trash bags. As he had now elegantly proven with the hockey rink tableau, presentation was essential to what he was doing. He wouldn't have been careless with any detail. That's why I began to consider the potential meanings of the mirror. I had to believe, even if the thought came suddenly, that placing the mirror with the dismembered body parts was far too deliberate to be an accident. I felt it even more deeply, a fluttering sensation from somewhere behind my lungs, that this was a carefully calculated, deeply personal message. For me, if not me, then who? The rest of the display was meant to speak to the world. Look who I am. Look who all of us are. Look what I'm doing with it. A rear-view mirror from a truck wasn't part of that message. I could feel the spark of thought racing through me. If it was from that truck, then it could only be for me. But what did it mean? What the hell is it supposed to mean? Deb said from behind me. A mirror. Why? I don't know, I said, still feeling its power pulsing in me. But I bet your dinner at Joe's Stone Crabs that it came from the refrigerated truck. No bet, she said, but at least it answers one important question. I looked at her, stunned. Could it be that my sister had leapt to an insight I'd missed? What question, sis? She jerked her chin toward the cluster of senior officers still arguing noisily on the edge of the rink. Jurisdiction. This one's ours. Let's go. Outwardly, Detective LaGuerta didn't appear too impressed with the new evidence. Maybe she was hiding a deeply uncomfortable bewilderment about the symbolic meaning of the mirror and what it implied beneath her calm exterior. Either that, or she really was just an idiot. She was still standing beside Dokes. He, at least, looked puzzled, though it might have been nothing more than his face being sore from too many constant scowls. Perhaps he was simply trying a new expression. "Morgan," LaGuerta said to Deb, "with that outfit on, I barely recognized you." "Well, people miss obvious things all the time, Detective," Deb replied, before I could stop her. "Exactly," LaGuerta said. "That's why some people never make detective. A flawless, effortless victory." LaGuerta didn't even bother waiting for the punch to land. She turned away from Deb and said to Dokes, "Find out who has keys to the rink. Anyone who could get in here whenever they wanted." "Okay," Dokes said. "Want me to check the locks too? See if anyone forced entry?" "No," LaGuerta said, giving him a subtly alluring frown. "We now know it's connected to the ice." She glanced at Deborah. That freezer truck was just misdirection. Then she turned back to Dokes. "The tissue damage came from the ice, right here. So the killer is tied to the ice at this location." She cast one last look at Deborah. "Not the truck." "Right," Dokes said. His tone wasn't exactly convinced, but he wasn't the one in charge. LaGuerta looked at me. "I think you can go home now, Dexter," she said. "I know where to find you if we need you." At least she didn't wink. Deborah walked with me toward the big double doors of the arena. "If this keeps up, I'll be directing traffic in a year," she grumbled. "Don't be ridiculous, Deb," I said. 2 months, tops." "Thanks. No, really. You can't go around challenging her like that. Didn't you see how Sergeant Dokes handled it? Try a little finesse, for God's sake." Finesse. My sister stopped in her tracks and snapped. "Listen to me, Dexter," she said. "This isn't a game." "It is, Deb. A game of manners. And you're playing it all wrong." "I'm not playing anything," she growled. "This is life and death. There's a killer out there walking free, and he'll keep walking free as long as that brain-dead LaGuerta is leading the case." I swallowed down a small bubble of hope. "Maybe so. It is so," Deborah insisted. "But Deb, you can't change that by getting yourself shipped off to Coconut Grove to do traffic detail." "No," she said. "But I can change it by catching the killer." Ah, there it was. Some people just don't understand how the world works. Other than that, my sister is a very smart person. Truly smart. She just inherited all of Harry's honest bluntness, his open approach to life, without any of the subtle wisdom that accompanied it. For Harry, being straightforward was a way to cut through the crap. For Deborah, it was a way to pretend the crap didn't exist. One of the patrol cars outside the arena drove me back to my own vehicle. I drove home, imagining that I had kept the head, wrapped it carefully in tissue paper, and placed it on the back seat to take with me. Gruesome and absurd, I knew. But for the first time, I truly understood those poor souls, those object fetishists who lovingly caress women's shoes or hoard dirty underwear. A nauseating feeling surged through me, making me want to both jump into a hot shower and give that head A good solid smack, but I didn't have it. There was nothing I could do with it but go home. I drove slowly, several miles under the speed limit. In Miami, that's practically the same as wearing a sign that says, "Kick me." Of course, no one actually kicked me. They would have had to slow down first. Still, I got honked at 7 times, passed by 8 cars, and had 5 drivers go around me, either by jumping onto the sidewalk or swerving into oncoming traffic. But today, even the wild energy of Miami drivers didn't lift my spirits. I was drained, stunned, and needed to think, away from the noisy chaos of the arena and that idiotic, infuriating LaGuerta. Driving slowly gave me space to reflect, to mull over everything that had happened. And I kept hearing one silly phrase echoing in my head, bouncing through my tired mind. It took on a life of its own. The more I heard it in my thoughts, the more it made sense. More than that, it became a kind of enchanting mantra. It became the key to thinking about the killer, the severed head in the street, the rear view mirror wedged among those miraculously bloodless body parts. If it were me, as in, if it were me, what would I say with the mirror? And if it were me, what would I do with the truck? Of course, he wasn't me. Envy like that is toxic to the soul. But since I didn't feel like this was something I owned, it didn't matter. If it were me, the truck would have been dumped in a canal somewhere not far from the arena. Then I would have slipped away, using a stashed car, a stolen one? Depends. If it were me, would I have planned the whole body display in the arena from the beginning? Or had the idea come to me as a response to the pursuit on the causeway? That made no sense. He couldn't have expected someone to chase him all the way to North Bay Village, could he? But then why did he have the head ready to throw? And after that, why bring the rest of the body to the arena? It seemed like a bazaar. Yes, there were plenty of ice blocks, and the cold was ideal. But that vast, echoing space wasn't suited to the kind of intimate moment I preferred. If he were me. There was a terrible emptiness to it, a grand openness that stifled true creativity. A fun place to visit, maybe, but not a workspace for an artist. A dump site, not a studio. It just didn't feel right for the act. If it were me, of course. So the arena was a bold move into unexplored territory. It could confuse the police, almost certainly throw them off course. That is, if they even realized there was a course to follow. Something that didn't seem very likely. And then there was the mirror. If I was right about why he chose the arena, then adding the mirror would certainly support that theory. It might be a commentary on what had just happened, on leaving the head behind. It could be a message that ties all the other clues together, fitting them neatly the way the dry body parts were stacked together. A subtle emphasis on an extraordinary piece of work. So what would the message be if it were me? I saw you. Ah, yes. Of course. Obvious, perhaps too much so. I saw you. I know you're behind me and watching me. But I'm also far ahead of you, setting the route, controlling the pace, watching you follow me. I see you. I know who you are, where you are, and all you know about me is that I'm watching you. I see you. It felt right. So why didn't it make me feel any better? And beyond that, how much should I tell poor Deborah about this? Things had gotten so personal that I had to work hard to remind myself that there was a very public aspect to all this. An aspect important to my sister and her career. I couldn't start telling her or anyone that I believed the killer was trying to say something to me. That if I were smart enough, I could listen and respond. But beyond that, was there anything else I should tell her? Did I even want to? It was too much. I needed sleep before I could untangle any of this mess. I wasn't quite at the point of sobbing as I crawled into bed, but I was dangerously close. I let sleep wash over me quickly, let everything dissolve into darkness. I managed to get about 2.5 hours of uninterrupted sleep before the phone rang. "It's me," the voice on the other end said. "Of course it is," I replied. "Deborah, right?" And naturally it was. I found the refrigerated truck. "Well, congratulations, Deb. That's great news." Silence stretched on the line. "Deb?" I finally asked. "That is good news, isn't it?" "No," my sister replied. "Oh." Sleep was pounding in my skull like a washerwoman beating a prayer rug. But I forced myself to focus. Deb, what happened?" "She checked for consistency," she said. "Made absolutely sure. The photos, the body parts, everything. Then I reported it all to LaGuerta like a good little scout." "And she didn't believe you?" I asked, stunned. "She probably did." I tried to blink, but my eyelids wanted to stay shut. So I gave up. "I'm sorry, Deb. One of us is clearly not making sense right now. Is it me?" I tried to explain to her, Deborah said, her voice so soft and tired, it made me feel like I was sinking underwater, with no place to hold on. I told her everything. I was even polite about it. "Good for you," I said. "So what did she say?" "Nothing," Deb said. "Nothing? Nothing at all," she repeated. "Except thank you, the way people say it to the parking lot attendant." Then she gave me that weird little smirk and turned away. "All right, but Deb," I said, "you weren't actually expecting her to." Then I found out why she smiled like that, Deb said. Like I was some filthy little idiot, she finally found a box to put in. "Oh no," I said, alarmed. "You mean she kicked you off the case?" "You're all off the case, Dexter," Deb said, her voice just as exhausted as I felt. LaGuerta made an arrest. Suddenly, the line went so quiet, I couldn't even think. But I was wide awake now. "What?" I asked, stunned. "LaGuerta arrested someone, a guy who works at the arena. She had him taken into custody and is convinced he's the killer." "No way," I said, even though, of course, it was entirely possible. "That brain-dead tramp, LaGuerta, not Deb." "I know, Dex, but don't even try talking to her. She's sure she's got the guy." "How sure?" I asked suspiciously. My head was spinning, feeling like it was about to split open. I honestly couldn't make sense of it. Deb's voice dropped. "She's holding a press conference in less than an hour," she said. "So yeah, for her, that's pretty damn sure." The pounding in my head grew so loud I almost couldn't hear what Deb said next. LaGuerta had made an arrest? Who? Who could she possibly have targeted? Was she really ignoring all the clues? The feeling, the style, the essence of these murders, and just grabbing some random guy? Because no one who could do what this killer had done was still doing would ever let someone like LaGuerta catch him. No way. I'd bet my life on it. No, Deborah, I said. No. No way. She arrested the wrong guy. Deb laughed. Tired, worn out, the dry cop laugh of someone fed up to the brim. Yeah, she said. I know that. You know that. But she doesn't. Want to hear the really funny part? Neither does he. That made no sense at all. What are you talking about, Deb? Who doesn't know? My sister let out a bitter, ironic laugh. The guy she arrested. I guess he's just as confused as LaGuerta, Dex, because he confessed. What? He confessed? Dexter, that poor, terrified bastard confessed. Chapter 12. The guy's name was Daryl Earl McHale, and he was the kind of person we like to call a two-time loser. For 12 of the past 20 years, he had been a guest of the state of Florida. Our dear Sergeant Dokes had managed to dig his name out from the employee records of the arena. During a computer cross-check of arena staff and individuals with prior convictions for violent behavior or crimes, McHale's name popped up twice. Daryl Earl was a drunk and a wife-beater. Occasionally it seemed he liked to rob gas stations, apparently just for the fun of it. He could usually hold down a minimum wage job for a month or two. But then on some fine Friday night, he'd polish off a six-pack or three and start to believe he was the wrath of God. So he'd get in his car and drive until he found a gas station, then simply go off the rails. He'd storm in, waving a weapon of some kind, take the cash and take off. Then he'd use the 80 or 90 bucks he stole to buy more beer, drink himself stupid, and beat the hell out of someone. Daryl Earl wasn't a big guy, 5'5" and rail thin. So for safety's sake, the person he beat up most often was his wife. With a lifestyle like that, he'd actually managed to get away with a few things. But one night, he went too far with his wife and left her in a wheelchair for a month. She pressed charges, and since Daryl Earl already had a record, he earned himself a trip to prison. He kept drinking, but apparently Rayford had scared him just enough to make him behave. Somewhat. He got a job and started working as a janitor at the arena, and by all accounts, he did his job with diligence. From what we could confirm, it had been a long time since he laid a hand on his wife. What's more, our guy even had a moment of minor fame during the Panthers' Stanley Cup run. Part of his job was to clean up the rink when fans threw things onto the ice. That year, it became a serious chore because every time the Panthers scored, fans hurled 3,000 to 4,000 plastic rats onto the ice. Daryl Earl had to dash out and collect them all. A mind-numbing task, no question. One night, encouraged by a few sips of cheap vodka, he picked up a plastic rat and broke into a little rat dance. The crowd loved it and started cheering for more. They began chanting for the dance every time Daryl Earl slid out onto the ice. He performed it for the rest of the season. Today, plastic rats are strictly banned. Even if federal law required them, no one would throw them anymore. The Panthers hadn't scored since Miami had an honest mayor, which was sometime last century. But McHale still showed up at games, hoping to get one last dance captured by the live TV cameras. At the press conference, LaGuerta played her part to perfection. She made it sound as if the ghost of McHale's brief fame had driven him to murder. And of course, with his history of drinking and violent behavior toward women, he was the ideal suspect for this dumb and brutal string of killings. But now, the women of Miami could rest easy. The rampage was over. Under the relentless pressure of a swift and thorough investigation, Daryl Earl had confessed. Case closed. Back to the sidewalk. Ladies, the press lapped it up. And honestly, who could blame them? LaGuerta gave a masterclass performance, offering just enough facts, spiced up with just enough embellishment to make the story sound convincing. Of course, you don't have to pass an IQ test to be a reporter. Still, I always held on to a small hope for a flicker of brilliance, and always ended up disappointed. Maybe I watched too many old black and white movies as a kid. I still expected some half-drunk, skeptical guy from the city's main daily to ask a hard-hitting question and force the investigators to double-check what they took for granted. But sadly, life doesn't always imitate art. At LaGuerta's press conference, the role of Spencer Tracy was played by a group of picture-perfect male and female models with tropical-themed outfits and perfectly styled hair. The most incisive questions they asked were things like, what was it like finding the head? And can we get a few photos? Spencer Tracy, 1900 to 1967, a legendary American actor, winner of 2 Academy Awards for Best Actor in 1938, Captain's Courageous, and 1939, Boys Town. Only one reporter, a guy named Nick something, from the local NBC affiliate, asked LaGuerta if she was absolutely certain McHale was the killer. But once she recited the undeniable evidence pointing to him, plus a perfectly clear confession, he stopped asking questions. Maybe he was satisfied, or maybe her answer was just too theatrical to challenge. And that was that. Case closed. Justice served. The mighty machine of Metro Miami's elite crime-fighting force had once again triumphed over the dark forces haunting our beautiful city. A performance straight out of a dream. LaGuerta released several photos of Daryl Earl in his most menacing poses, paired with glossy shots of herself conducting the interrogation. Taken, of course, by a high-fashion photographer who charges $250 an hour in South Beach. It all became a symphony of irony, so miraculous it was almost sublime. The image of danger and the face of actual death, so utterly different, Because no matter how brutish Daryl Earl might have looked, the real threat to society was La Guerta. She had whistled the hounds back into their kennels, shut down all leads, and told everyone to go back to bed while the building was still on fire. Was I really the only one who could see that Daryl Earl McHale couldn't possibly be the killer? That there was a style and intelligence to these murders far beyond anything a brain-dead lout like McHale could even comprehend? I had never felt more alone than in that moment, admiring the killer's technique. The body parts themselves seemed to sing to me, a mad hymn of bloodless wonder that lit up my heart and flooded my veins with reverent awe. Of course, that didn't lessen my resolve to catch the real killer, a cold, sick murderer of innocence who absolutely had to be brought to justice. Right, Dexter? Right? I sat in my apartment, rubbing sleep from my eyes, thinking about the performance I'd just witnessed. It was as close to perfection as a press conference could get, minus free food and some tasteful nudity. La Guerta had clearly tapped every connection she had to turn it into the biggest, flashiest event possible, and it had worked. For probably the first time in her designer-suited, ladder-climbing career, La Guerta truly believed she'd caught the right guy. She had to believe it. Honestly, it was kind of sad. She thought she had done everything right this time. That she wasn't just playing a political game, but that she was making a smart, strategic bet on a solid lead. She believed she'd solved the crime, done it her way, caught the killer, stopped the murders. A job well done, deserving of applause. And she was about to receive a lovely surprise when the next body turned up. Because I knew, absolutely, without a shred of doubt, the real killer was still out there. He could very well be watching the press conference on Channel 7, the favorite station for viewers who enjoy decapitations and blood spatter. Right now, he was probably laughing so hard he could barely hold a knife stand. But that would pass. And when it passed, his sense of humor would almost certainly compel him to respond. For some reason, that thought didn't fill me with fear, horror, or righteous urgency to stop the maniac before it was too late. Instead, I felt a flicker of anticipation. I knew it wasn't right, which, of course, only made me like it more. Oh yes, I wanted the killer stopped, caught, brought to justice, absolutely. But did it have to be so soon? Besides, there was a small compromise to be made. If I had to do my part in stopping the real killer, then I could at least make sure something worthwhile happened along the way. Just as I was thinking that, my phone rang. Yes, I saw it. I said into the receiver. "Oh God," Deborah said on the other end of the line. "I think I'm going to be sick." "Well, I'm not going to wipe your fevered brow, little sister. We've got work to do." "Oh God," she repeated, then asked, "What work?" "Tell me this," I said. "Are people pinching their noses when they look at you, sis?" "I'm tired, Dexter. I've never felt so sick of it all in my life. And what the hell does that even mean?" "I'm asking if you're in what Dad would have called the doghouse. Has your name become toxic around the department? Is your professional competence being dragged through the mud, ruined, called into question? Between La Guerta stabbing me in the back and that Einstein nickname," my sister said, with a bitterness far too deep for someone so young. Yeah, my professional rep is basically crap now. Good. That means you've got nothing left to lose, she snorted. Glad I could help. Because yeah, Dexter, I'm there. If I go any lower at the department, I'll be brewing coffee in the community relations office. Where does this go, Dex? I leaned back and closed my eyes. You're going to go to the captain and the whole department and tell them you don't believe Daryl Earl is the guy, and that another murder is about to happen. You'll submit some persuasive reasons from your investigation, and then you'll be the laughingstock of Miami Metro for a while. I already am, she said. No big deal. But is there a reason to do it? I shook my head slightly. Sometimes I could hardly believe how naive my sister could be. Sweetheart, I said, you don't really believe Daryl Earl is guilty, do you? She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, and I suddenly realized just how tired she must be. Just as exhausted as I was, but without the boost of certainty that I had. Deb? He confessed, Dexter, she finally said, and her voice sounded utterly drained. I don't. I've been wrong before, even when. But he confessed. Doesn't that mean something? Maybe we should just let it go, Dex. Oh, ye of little faith, I said. She got the wrong guy, Deborah. You're about to rewrite history. Sure, she said. Daryl Earl is not the killer, I said. There's no doubt. Even if you're right, so what? She asked. Now it was my turn to blink in confusion. I'm sorry? Think about it. If I were the killer, why wouldn't I realize I've gotten away with it? Some other guy's been arrested. The heat's off. So why wouldn't I just stop? Or go somewhere else and start fresh? No way, I said. You don't understand how he thinks. Yeah, I know, she said. So how do you know? I chose to ignore the question. He's going to stay right here and kill again. He needs to show us what he thinks of us. What does that mean? It means bad things, I admitted. We did a stupid thing when we arrested an obvious screw-up like Daryl Earl. It's almost funny. Ha ha, Deb said, not amused at all. But we also insulted him. We gave all the credit for his work to a dim-witted loser. That's like telling Jackson Pollock that a 6-year-old could paint like him. Jackson Pollock, the artist? Dexter, this is a butcher. In his own way, Deborah. He's an artist, and he thinks of himself that way. Oh God, that's the dumbest thing. Trust me, Deb. Sure, I trust you, why wouldn't I? So now we've got an artist in a mood that's both amused and enraged, who's definitely not going anywhere, right? Right, I said. He's going to kill again, right in front of us. It'll probably be a bigger statement. You mean this time he's going to kill a fat hooker? Bigger in scale, Deborah. Broader in concept. More grand. Oh, grand. Sure, like with a backhoe maybe. The stakes have escalated, Deb. We've pursued him, insulted him. And the next kill will reflect that. Great, my sister said. And how, exactly? I don't really know, I admitted. But you're sure? I am, I said. Great, she said. Now I know what to keep an eye out for. Chapter 13. The moment I stepped through the door after work on Monday, I knew something was off. Someone had been in my apartment. The front door wasn't broken. The windows hadn't been forced. I couldn't see any signs of damage, but I knew. Call it a sixth sense or whatever you like. Someone had been here. Maybe I could still smell the intruder's pheromones lingering in the air. Or maybe my lazy boy recliner had been slightly disturbed. However I knew, didn't matter. I just did. Someone had entered my apartment while I was at work. It might have been nothing. After all, this is Miami. People come home every day to find their TVs missing, their jewelry and electronics gone, their personal space violated, their belongings looted, and their dogs mysteriously sprawled belly up. But this time felt different. Even as I did a quick sweep of the place, I already knew I wouldn't find anything missing. And I was right. Nothing was gone. But something had been left behind. It took me a few minutes to find it. Instinct, or maybe professional reflex, had me checking the obvious first. When an intruder visits you, the natural order of things is for your stuff to disappear. Toys, valuables, keepsakes, the last few remaining chocolate chip cookies. So I checked, but all my things were exactly where I left them. Computer, stereo system, TV, DVD player, untouched. Even my small collection of microscope slides, each containing a single drop of dried blood, hidden on the bookshelf, undisturbed. Everything was precisely as I had left it. Next, I checked my personal areas, just to be sure. Bedroom, bathroom, medicine cabinet, all seemingly fine. But still, there was something hanging in the air. A strange sense that each item had been looked at, touched, moved, with such perfect care that even the dust hadn't shifted. I returned to the living room and flopped into my chair, scanning the room with suspicion. I was absolutely certain someone had been here. But why? And who would care enough about a small, quiet guy like me to break in and then leave everything exactly as it was? Nothing was missing. Nothing had been moved. Maybe the stack of newspapers in the trash was leaning a bit more to the left, but was that just my imagination? A draft from the air conditioner? There was nothing noticeably different. Nothing taken, nothing broken, nothing. So why break into my apartment? It had nothing special, believe me. That's part of the Harry persona I constructed. Blend in, act normal, even boring. Don't do or own anything that sparks conversation. I followed that rule. I didn't own anything of value beyond a stereo system and a computer. My neighbors had far more appealing targets. So why break in, do nothing, take nothing, leave no trace? I leaned back and closed my eyes, nearly convinced I had imagined it all. Just overstimulated neurons, a symptom of sleep deprivation, and too much anxiety over Deborah's bruised career. Maybe just another sign that poor old Dexter was beginning to drift into deep waters. A gentle slide from existential detachment to outright insanity. Believing you're surrounded by unseen enemies isn't necessarily a crazy thought in Miami. but acting on it certainly is. Eventually, they'd have no choice but to lock me up. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it off. A passing idea, a trick of the mind, a fleeting disturbance. I stood up, stretched, took a deep breath, tried to think of something pleasant. Nothing came to mind. I shook my head and walked into the kitchen to grab some water, and there it was. I stood in front of the fridge and stared. I don't know how long. Just stood there, dumbstruck, gaping. A Barbie doll head had been attached to the refrigerator. Its hair was pinned to the fridge with one of my tiny tropical fruit-shaped magnets. I had no memory of placing it there. No memory of owning a Barbie doll, which felt like the kind of thing I would remember. I reached out and touched the tiny plastic head. It wobbled slightly, tapping against the fridge with a soft clack. It rotated a quarter turn, just enough to tilt its eyes toward me, with the eager expression of a collie dog. I stared back. Without really knowing what I was doing or why, I opened the refrigerator. Inside, laid carefully on the ice tray, was the rest of the Barbie doll. Both legs and both arms had been removed. The torso was severed at the waist. Each piece was neatly arranged, tied together with a pink ribbon. In one of Barbie's tiny hands was a small toy accessory, a Barbie mirror. After a long moment, I closed the fridge door. I wanted to lie down and press my cheek against the cool vinyl floor. Instead, I flicked the Barbie head with my pea. It swung and tapped again. Clack, clack. I flicked it once more. Clack, clack. Well, I'd found a new hobby. I left the doll exactly where it was, returned to my chair, sunk deep into the cushions, and closed my eyes. I knew I should have been disturbed, angry, frightened, violated, overwhelmed by paranoid hostility and righteous fury. But I wasn't. Instead, I felt what? A mild sense of wonder, maybe worry, maybe excitement. There was no longer any doubt who had broken into my apartment, unless I was willing to believe some random stranger, for reasons unknown, had chosen my home as the perfect place to stage a headless Barbie display. No, the artist I admired had come to visit me. How he found me didn't matter. Recognizing my license plate that night on the causeway would have been easy. He had plenty of time to observe me from his hiding place behind the gas station. And after that, anyone with basic computer skills could have gotten my address. Once he had it, breaking in wasn't difficult. He'd taken his time, studied the space, and left behind a message. This was the message. A severed doll's head on display. Body parts neatly arranged in my ice tray. And once again, that damn mirror. Combined with the utter indifference toward everything else in the apartment, it all pointed to one thing. But what was it? What was he trying to say? He could have left anything or nothing. He could have stabbed a blood-soaked butcher knife through the heart of a raven and into the upholstery of my chair. I was grateful he hadn't. That would have been terribly messy. But still, why Barbie? Was this message more sinister than the others? More grotesque? Or less? Was it saying, "I'm watching you and I'm going to get you"? Or was he saying, Hi, want to play? I did. Of course I did. But then there was the mirror. Its return gave it a new meaning. Something beyond the truck and the chase on the causeway. It had to mean more now. The only thing I could think of was look at yourself. What was that supposed to mean? Why should I look at myself? I wasn't vain enough to enjoy that sort of thing. At least not about my appearance. And why would I want to look at myself when the only thing I really wanted to look at was the killer? So there had to be another meaning to the mirror. Something I wasn't grasping yet. And still, I couldn't be sure. Maybe it meant nothing. I didn't want to believe that of such a refined artist, but it was certainly possible. This could be a purely personal message. Mad, twisted, irrational. There was no way to know for sure. And therefore, no way to know what I should do. If there even was anything I should do. I made a very human decision. Funny when you think about it, me making a human decision. Harry would have been proud. In proper human fashion, I decided to do nothing. Just wait and observe. I couldn't report what had happened. I mean, what was I going to say? Ah, Captain Matthews, I think you should know that someone may have broken into my apartment and left a Barbie doll in the fridge. Promising idea. I'm sure that would go over brilliantly at the station. Maybe Sergeant Dokes would personally investigate and finally get to use some of his more creative interrogation techniques. Or maybe they'd just stick me on the mentally unfit for duty list, right next to poor Deb, since the investigation was officially closed. And even if it wasn't, it certainly hadn't involved any Barbie dolls. No, there was nothing to report. At least nothing I could explain. I couldn't even risk telling Deborah. Not without getting a metaphorical elbow to the face, for reasons I couldn't even begin to explain. Not to her, not to myself. This had to stay personal. By keeping it that way, I might stand a better chance of closing in on our little uninvited guest. To bring him to justice, of course, naturally. Once I came to that conclusion, I felt much better. Almost euphoric, really. I didn't know where this would lead, but I was ready for whatever came next. The feeling stayed with me all night, and even into the next day at work, while I prepped a lab report, consoled Deb, and stole one of Vince Masuoka's donuts. It stayed with me through the bumper-to-bumper, homicidal rush hour drive home. I was in a zen-like state of readiness, fully prepared for any surprise that might come my way. Or so I thought. I had just gotten home, sunk into my recliner, hoping for a moment of peace. When the phone rang, I let it ring. I wanted a few minutes to breathe. Nothing could be that urgent. Besides, I'd paid nearly $50 for an answering machine. Let it earn its keep. 2 rings. I closed my eyes, inhaled. Relax, old friend. 3 rings. Exhaled. The answering machine clicked on, and my perfectly urbane, expertly crafted, outgoing message began to play. Hi, I'm not home right now. but if you leave your name and number after the tone, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you. What a voice. What a mind. What a message. Practically human. I was quite proud. I took another breath and waited for the melodic beep. Hi, it's me. Female voice. Not Deborah. One of my eyelids started twitching with irritation. Why did so many people start their messages with "it's me"? Of course it's you. We all know that. But who the hell are you? In my case, the list of possibilities was short. It wasn't Deborah. Didn't sound like LaGuerta, though anything was possible. So that left Rita. I'm sorry, A long, dragging sigh. Listen, Dexter, I'm sorry. I thought you'd call. And when you didn't, another sigh. Anyway, I need to talk. Because I realized. Oh, damn it. Can you, call me if you know? I didn't know. Not at all. I wasn't even certain it was her. Could it really be Rita? Another sigh. I'm sorry if. A long pause. 2 slow breaths. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, then a sharp exhale. Please call me, Dexter. Just another pause. Another sigh. Then she hung up. There have been many times in my life when I felt like I was missing something. Some crucial piece of the puzzle that everyone else carried around without even realizing it. I usually didn't mind, since in most cases, that missing piece turned out to be something astonishingly pointless about human life. Like understanding baseball rules, or not being too blunt on a first date. But there were other times like now, when I felt like I was locked out of a vast reservoir of insight, a wellspring of perception that everyone else tapped into so deeply, they didn't even talk about it, couldn't even put it into words. This was one of those times. I was supposed to understand something here, something very specific Rita was trying to say. Her pauses, her stammering, her sighs, they were meant to convey something grand and mystical that any man would instinctively grasp. But I had no clue what it was. No idea how to figure it out. Should I count her breaths, measure the pauses, and translate them into Bible verse numbers to crack some cryptic code? What was she trying to tell me? And more importantly, why? Why was she even trying to tell me anything? As I understood it, when I kissed Rita, in that moment of stupid, impulsive weakness, I crossed a line we both silently agreed never to cross. Once crossed, it couldn't be undone. No takebacks. In its own way, that kiss was an act of murder, and that was oddly comforting. I had killed the careful, structured relationship between us, stabbed it through the heart with my tongue, and shoved it off a cliff. Boom. Dead. And honestly, I hadn't thought of Rita since. She had vanished, deleted from my life by a burst of unexplainable impulse. And now she was calling me, leaving a voicemail of sighs. For my amusement? Why? Did she want to punish me? Call me names? Rub my face in her confusion? Force me to understand how deeply I'd offended her? All of it began to make me deeply uncomfortable. I paced around my apartment, agitated. Why was I even thinking about Rita? Right now, I had far more important things to worry about. Rita was just a disguise, a silly costume I put on during weekends to pretend I wasn't the kind of person who wanted to do what that fascinating guy was doing. And I wasn't. Was it jealousy? Of course not. I wasn't doing those things. I'd just taken a temporary break. Certainly wouldn't start again anytime soon. Too dangerous. I wasn't ready yet. But I walked into the kitchen and flicked the Barbie head. Clack. Clack, clack. Was I feeling something? Playfulness? A deep, persistent curiosity? Professional jealousy? I couldn't say. And Barbie had no answers. It was simply too much. The fake confession. The invasion of my private space. And now, Rita, a person can only take so much. Even a fake person like me. I was getting restless, dizzy, disoriented, too wound up and half asleep at the same time. I stepped to the window and looked out. Night had fallen, and far in the distance, over the water, a soft glow rose into the sky. And as it appeared, a devilish voice stirred from deep within me to greet it. The moon. A whisper in my ear. Not even a sound, really. Just the faintest sensation, like someone saying your name. Just loud enough to hear. Just near enough to feel it at the edge of your awareness. Very close. Maybe getting closer. Not a word, but the dry rustle of something not a voice. A tone without tone. A thought that felt like breath. My face was burning. Suddenly, I could hear myself breathing. The voice came again, light, almost imperceptible, brushing the edge of my ear. Stop. I turned, even though I knew full well no one was there. Not to my ear, but to my dear old friend inside, now awake, roused by him and the moon. A perfect round moon, babbling away with delight. Oh, how much it had to say. No matter how I tried to tell it that now wasn't the right time, that it was too soon, that there were other things, important things, that needed to be done. The moon had answers for all of it, and more. And so, even though I stood there for 15 minutes arguing, there was never really a question. I grew desperate, fought back with every trick I knew, and when that failed, I did something that stunned me to my very core. I called Rita. "Oh, Dexter," she said. I was so scared. Thank you for calling. I know," I said, though obviously I didn't know a thing. I don't know if can I see you later and I really want to talk to you. Of course, I said, and we agreed to meet later at her place. And I found myself wondering what she had in mind. Violence? Accusatory tears? A full volume name shouting session? This was foreign territory for me. I had no idea what to expect. After I hung up, the call granted me a strange peace. About half an hour of calm before the soft voice inside slipped back in again. Quietly, but insistently, reminding me that tonight simply had to be special. I felt drawn back to the window. And there it was again, that perfectly round, gleeful face in the sky. The moon, giggling. I pulled the curtain shut and turned away, circling the apartment from room to room, touching things, pretending I was double-checking that nothing had been stolen, even though I knew nothing had, and I knew exactly why. Each lap around the apartment brought me closer to the small desk in the living room, where I kept my computer. I knew what I wanted to do, and what I didn't. Eventually, after 45 minutes, the urge became too strong. Too dizzy to stand much longer, I figured I'd drop into the recliner, simply because it was closest. Because somehow, I'd already gravitated toward it. Instead, I powered on the computer. And as it booted up, no, I thought, I'm not ready. Of course, that didn't matter. Whether I was ready or not made no difference. It was. Chapter 14. I was almost certain it was him. Almost. And I'd never been in a situation before where I was only almost certain. I felt weak, dizzy, almost sick with a mixture of excitement, uncertainty, and sheer wrongness. But of course, the dark passenger was at the wheel now, driving from the back seat. And what I felt no longer mattered all that much, because it felt strong, cold, hungry, ready. I could feel it swelling inside me, rising from the dark Dexter corners of my lizard brain, a growing pulsing presence that could only end one way. And in that case, best it end this way. I'd found him a few months back, but after a short period of observation, I decided the preacher was a more certain target. And this one could wait. That had been a mistake. Now I knew. He couldn't wait a second longer. He lived on a small street in Coconut Grove. A few houses down from his dingy little place were low-income homes occupied by black families, a couple of barbecue joints, and sagging old churches. Half a mile the other way sat a row of millionaire mansions, obscenely modern homes with tall walls meant to keep people like him out. But Jamie Jaworski lived right in the middle, in a house he shared with a million fleas and the ugliest dog I'd ever seen. Still, it was a house he shouldn't have been able to afford. Jaworski worked part-time as a janitor at Ponce de Leon Middle School, and as far as I could tell, that was his only source of income. He worked 3 days a week, just enough to scrape by, but not more. Of course, I didn't care about his finances. What I did care about was the small but noticeable uptick in runaway reports from Ponce since Jaworski started working there. All the kids were girls, 12 to 13 years old, blonde. That detail mattered for some reason. It's the kind of thing police tend to overlook, but it always gets the attention of people like me. Maybe because it's not politically correct to point out that dark-haired, dark-skinned girls deserve equal opportunity to be abducted, molested, and chopped into pieces on camera. Don't you think? Jaworski also seemed to be the last person to see each of the missing girls. The police had spoken with him, held him overnight, questioned him, and found nothing. Of course, they had to navigate tricky legal standards, like the fact that torture is generally frowned upon these days. Without a compelling reason, Jamie Jaworski was never going to open up about his particular hobbies. And he certainly wouldn't do it for me. But I knew he'd done it. He was helping those girls vanish into fast-track, short-lived film careers. I was almost certain. I hadn't found any body parts, hadn't caught him in the act, but everything lined up. Online, I'd found a few particularly creative photos of 3 of the missing girls. They didn't look too happy in those photos, despite being engaged in activities that were supposed to be pleasurable. Or so I'd been told. I couldn't prove a connection between Jaworski and the photos. But the postmark was from South Miami, just minutes from the school. He was surviving on his meager income. And in any case, my friend in the back seat was reminding me with increasing urgency that there was no more time to wait. This wasn't a case where absolute certainty mattered, but the dog worried me. Dogs are always a problem. They don't like me. They don't approve of what I do to their owners, especially when I don't share any of the goodies. I had to figure out a way around the dog to get to Jaworski. Maybe he'd come outside. If not, I'd have to find a way in. I drove past Jaworski's house 3 times. Nothing. No ideas. I needed a bit of luck before the dark passenger made me do something reckless. Just as my dear companion began to whisper his usual impulsive suggestions, luck arrived. Jaworski came out of the house and climbed into his beat-up red Toyota pickup just as I passed. I slowed as much as I could, and moments later, he backed out and took off down Douglas Road. I looped back and tailed him. I had no idea how I was going to do this. I wasn't prepared. No safe room, no clean sheets. Nothing but a roll of duct tape and a boning knife under the seat. I'd have to do it clean, invisible, perfect, and I didn't have a plan. I hated improvising, but right now, I didn't have a choice. Once again, luck was on my side. Traffic was light as Jaworski drove south toward Old Cutler Road. After about a mile, he turned left, heading toward the coast. A new development project was underway. One of those civic improvements meant to better all our lives by turning trees and wildlife into concrete and retirees from New Jersey. Jaworski cruised leisurely past the construction sites, rolled by half of a golf course with flagpoles already placed, but no grass yet laid until he reached the water's edge. The steel skeleton of a massive luxury condo complex rose into view, blocking out the moon. I fell far back, killed my headlights, then crept close enough to observe what my prey was doing. Jaworski pulled up next to what would one day be the main building, then parked. He got out of the truck and stood between it and a mound of sand. For a moment, he just looked around, and I pulled over, killed the engine. He stared up at the building, then walked toward the path leading to the water. He looked content. He went inside. I figured he was looking for a security guard. So was I. Usually, at large construction sites like this, the security team has a golf cart to patrol between locations. It saves money. But then again, this is Miami. A portion of every project budget is set aside for materials expected to mysteriously disappear. From the look of things, Jaworski had plans to help that budget along. I stepped out of my car and stuffed my boning knife and a roll of duct tape into the cheap tote bag I'd brought. Inside were a few pairs of rubber-coated gardening gloves and some printed-out photos. Nothing more. Just a handful of odds and ends I'd pulled from the internet. I slung the bag over my shoulder and moved quietly through the night until I reached his battered pickup. The bed was empty, and the cab was just as bare. Just stacks of paper cups, Burger King wrappers, and empty Camel cigarette packs littering the floor. Nothing in the truck that wasn't small, dirty, and disgusting. Just like Jaworski himself. I looked up. Above the unfinished building, I could see only the glow of the moon. A night breeze swept across my face, carrying with it all the intoxicating smells of our tropical paradise. Diesel, rotting vegetation, and fresh cement. I took a deep breath and forced my thoughts back to Jaworski. He was somewhere inside those walls. I didn't know how much time I had. A faint voice in my mind urged me to hurry. I left the truck and stepped into the building. As I passed through the doorway, I heard him. Or rather, I heard something. Buzzing, scraping, a strange mechanical sound that could only belong to him. Or I stopped. The noise was off to one side. I crept toward it, carefully. A conduit ran up the wall. A metal pie. I pressed my hand against it and felt it vibrating slightly, like something was moving inside. A spark lit in my brain. Jaworski was stripping copper wire. Copper was worth money. There was a thriving black market for it, in every form. Another humble way to supplement his janitor's wage, keeping him fed between missing girls. He could make a few $100s from a single good haul of wiring. Now I knew what he was doing, and a hazy idea began to take shape. From the sounds, he had to be somewhere above me. I could easily follow, shadow him silently until the right moment, then strike. But here I was completely exposed, out in the open, unprepared. I was used to doing this sort of thing right. Stepping outside those carefully defined boundaries made me deeply uncomfortable. A quiet chill crawled up my spine. Why was I doing this? Once again, the answer came quickly. Of course, it wasn't me doing this. It was my dear companion, riding shotgun in the shadows. I was just driving the car because I had the license. But between us, there had always been a mutual understanding, a careful balance, a coexistence defined by the Harry solution. And now, he was raging across the clean, chalk-drawn lines Harry had laid down for us. Why? Was it anger? Could the invasion of my home have been so offensive that it awakened him, pushing him to retaliate? He wasn't angry with me. As always, he remained calm, quietly thrilled, eager for the kill. And so was I. I felt slightly dizzy, weightless, like a kite, spinning in gleeful spirals, dancing on a razor's edge through a rush of inner whispers that almost resembled emotions. Its lurching, wavering rhythm had led me here, into a dirty, dangerous place I hadn't planned for, to do something purely impulsive that until now had always required careful choreograph. And even knowing all this, I still wanted to go through with it. I had to go through with it. Fine, but I didn't have to do it barefaced. I glanced around. At the far end of the room, a stack of sheetrock lay bundled together in plastic tarp. In a flash, I'd cut myself an apron and a strange, translucent mask from the wrapping. I carved out holes for my eyes, nose, and mouth, tied it at the back of my neck, knotting the plastic sheet tightly behind my head. Anonymous. Completely. It looked silly. Maybe. But I was used to hunting with a mask. Besides the inner compulsion to do things right, the mask simply removed one more thing to worry about. It calmed me. So this was a good idea. I pulled out a pair of gloves from the bag and slid them on. Now I was ready. I found Jaworski on the 3rd floor. A coil of copper wire sat at his feet. I stood in the shadow of the stairwell, watching as he ripped wiring from the walls. Then I ducked back under the stair, using the duct tape. I posted the photos I brought. Small, sickly sweet images of the missing girls in various poses, both innocent and lurid. I taped them to the concrete wall, where he'd see them when he came through the stairwell. Then I looked back at Jaworski. He yanked another 20 yards of cable. The line snagged. He tugged twice, then pulled a heavy set of pliers from his tool pouch and snipped the wire. He bent down, scooped up the coil, and slung it over his arm. Then he headed for the stairs, right toward me. I sank back into the shadows and waited. Jaworski didn't try to be quiet. He didn't expect to be interrupted, and certainly not by me. I heard his footsteps, the slight dragging noise of the wire trailing behind him. Closer. He stepped through the doorway, one stride past me, before he saw the pictures. Jesus, he gasped, like he'd been punched in the gut. His eyes bulged, his mouth opened. He froze, and then I was behind him. Don't move. Not a sound, we said. Hey, wait up, he started. I twisted my wrist, just enough to press the blade into the skin under his chin. He exhaled, a broken, desperate breath. A tiny line of ugly blood sprang out. Unnecessary. Why does no one ever listen? I said not a sound, we told him. This time, he obeyed. The only sounds were the hiss of duct tape being unspooled, Jaworski's frantic breathing, and the gentle tisk-tisk of the dark passenger's delight. I taped his mouth shut, bound his wrists with a bit of his beloved copper wire, and dragged him to a pile of sheetrock wrapped in plastic. Moments later, I had him lashed to my improvised table. Let's talk, we said, calm and cold, the voice of the dark passenger. Jaworski didn't know whether he was allowed to speak. Not that he could anyway. Not with duct tape over his mouth. So he stayed silent. "Let's talk about the missing girls," we said, then ripped the tape from his mouth. "Oh, what do you mean?" he sputtered. But his performance was unconvincing. "I think you know what I mean," we replied. No, he stammered. "Oh yes," we said. Maybe that was too clever. My timing was off. This entire evening had been off. But Jaworski had grown bolder. He looked up at my mask, squinting at the plastic. "Who are you? A cop or something?" he asked. "No," we said, and sliced off his left ear. It was the part closest to the blade. The knife was razor sharp. For a moment, he couldn't believe what had just happened, couldn't comprehend that he was now permanently, forever, missing an ear. So I tossed it onto his chest, to help him understand. His eyes bulged. He sucked in a huge breath to scream. But I stuffed a wad of plastic into his mouth before he could. "Don't," we said. Worse things could happen, and they would. Of course, but he didn't need to know that. "The missing girls?" we asked, softly, coldly. We waited, watched his eyes, ensured he wouldn't scream. Then we peeled the gag off. "Oh God," he whimpered. "My ear." "You've still got another one. Works just as well," we said. "Tell us about the girls in the pictures." "Us? What do you mean, us?" "God, it hurts," he groaned. "Some people just don't get it." I shoved the gag back in and got to work. I nearly lost control. It was so easy, too easy, to be swept up in a moment like this. My heart was pounding madly. I had to fight hard not to let my hands shake. But I continued the task, searching, exploring, looking for something always just beyond reach. Excited and deeply frustrated. The pressure built inside me, rising to my ears, screaming for release. But it never came. Only more pressure. The feeling that something extraordinary was right there, just beyond my senses, waiting to be found, to be consumed. But I couldn't find it. None of the old methods brought even a flicker of thrill. What now? In my frustration, I opened a vein. A horrible spill of blood spread across the plastic sheeting beneath the janitor. I paused, looked for an answer, found nothing. I turned away, toward the window. I stared, silent. The moon reflected perfectly on the water, and for some inexplicable, logical, necessary reason, in that moment, all I could do was look at it, watch it shimmer. So flawless. I stumbled, bumped against my makeshift table, and came back to myself. But the moon, or was it the water, so close. I was so close to something. I could almost smell it. But what was it? A shiver ran through me. A feeling so right that it set off a chain of more shivers until my teeth began to chatter. But why? What did it mean? There was something out there, something important, something pure and blindingly clear, wrapped around the moon, stretched across the water, hanging just in front of the tip of my boning knife. and I couldn't quite reach it. I turned back to look at the janitor. He made me angry, lying there covered in useless cuts and pointless blood. But it was hard to stay angry when the glorious Florida moon was bathing me in silver light. Warm, tropical breezes brushing against my skin, and the night was alive with the music of torn duct tape and terrified breathing. I nearly laughed. People die for all sorts of strange reasons, but this miserable, flea-bitten wretch was going to die for copper wire. And the look on his face, so much pain, confusion, and despair. It could have been hilarious if I weren't so disappointed. He wasn't worth the effort, really. It wasn't his fault I wasn't performing at my usual level. He wasn't even bad enough to top my personal hit list. He was just a disgusting little creep who killed children for money and lust. Only 4 or 5 girls, as far as I knew. I almost felt sorry for him. He wasn't ready for the big leagues. Oh well, back to business. I returned to Jaworski. He wasn't thrashing as much now, but he still had too much energy for my usual methods. Of course, I didn't have my high-end professional tools tonight, and the journey had already been a little rough on him. But like a true soldier, he hadn't complained. A flicker of respect passed through me, and I slowed down, easing off my earlier carelessness. I took my time, focused with more precision on his hands. I flowed through the process, lost in my joyful exploration. Eventually, the muffled screaming and frenzied thrashing brought me back to myself. I remembered. I hadn't even confirmed his guilt yet. I waited for him to settle, then pulled the wad of plastic from his mouth. "The missing girls?" we asked. "Oh God. Oh my God. Oh God," he whimpered, barely audible. "I don't think so," we said. "I think maybe we already left them behind." "Please," he begged. "Oh, please. Tell me about the missing girls," we said again. "Okay," he gasped. "You took them." "Yes. How many?" He just breathed, wheezing for a long moment. His eyes fluttered shut. I feared I might have pushed him too far, too fast. But finally, he opened them and looked at me. "5, he said. 5 little beauties. I don't regret it." "Of course you don't," we said. I placed a hand gently on his arm. It was a beautiful moment. "And now," we said, "neither do I." I stuffed the gag back into his mouth and turned back to my work. Had just gotten into a good rhythm when I heard the sound of footsteps. The security guard downstairs, approaching. Chapter 15. It was the sound of the guard's radio that gave him away. I was completely absorbed in something I had never tried before when I heard it. I was working on the torso with the tip of my knife, and for the first time that night, I felt a thrilling surge of response shoot down my spine and into my legs. I didn't want to stop, but a radio. That was worse news than just a security guard approaching. If he called for backup or requested a lockdown, there were certain things I had just done that might be a bit difficult to explain. I looked down at Jaworski. He was nearly finished, yet I wasn't happy with how it had gone. Too sloppy. I hadn't really found what I was searching for. There were a few brief moments where I felt on the edge of something miraculous. A stunning revelation about what? The water rippling beyond the window? But it hadn't happened. Whatever it was, it never came. Now I was left with a half-finished child rapist. Unfinished, unclean, unsatisfying, and a security guard on his way to meet us. I hate ending things abruptly. It's supposed to be a moment of closure for both of us, the dark passenger and me. But what choice did I have? For far too long, shamefully long, I actually considered killing the guard and continuing my work. It would be easy. Then I could start fresh, really dig into the moment. But no, of course not. That wasn't acceptable. The guard was innocent, about as innocent as anyone can be, and still survive in Miami. Maybe the worst he'd ever done was flip someone off on the Palmetto Expressway. Spotless. No, I had to retreat. That was all I could do. If I had to leave this dirty little janitor unfinished, unsatisfying, so be it. Better luck next time. I stared at the filthy mess of a man and was flooded with disgust. He was a sticky mass of blood and fluid, his face soaked in wet gore. A thick red stream leaks. In a flash of frustration, I slashed his throat. Instant regret. A geyser of blood spurted out, a grotesque spectacle that made my sloppy impulse all the more pathetic. Feeling stained, defiled, and unfulfilled, I lunged toward the stairs, the dark passenger grumbling behind me with cold, petulant displeasure. I veered off at the second floor, hugged the wall, and crept to a window that hadn't been fitted with glass. Below, I spotted the security guard's electric cart, parked and facing Old Cutler, hopefully meaning he'd come from the other direction and hadn't seen my car. Standing beside the cart was a round, olive-skinned young man with black hair and a thin black mustache. He was looking up, thankfully toward the far end of the building. Had he heard anything? Or was this just routine patrol? I had to hope it was the latter. If he had heard something, if he was outside calling for backup, I might be caught. And as clever and smooth-talking as I am, I doubted I could talk my way out of this. The guard scratched his mustache with a thumb, as if coaxing it to grow. He frowned, scanning the building's facade. I ducked back inside. A moment later, when I peeked out again, I could only see the top of his head. He was coming in. I waited until I heard his footsteps on the stairs. Then I launched out the window from between the first and second floors, clinging to the concrete ledge with my fingers, and let go. I landed horribly, twisted an ankle on a rock, scraped one elbow raw. But limping with all my strength, I scrambled into the darkness and made for the car. My heart was hammering by the time I slid behind the wheel. I glanced back. No sign of the guard. I started the engine, headlights off, and eased out onto Old Cutler. Southbound, I took the long way home via Dixie Highway. My pulse was still pounding in my ears. What a stupid, reckless risk I'd taken. I had never done something so impulsive before. Never acted without a careful plan. That was the Harry method. Careful, safe, meticulously prepared. Darkness, but disciplined. And instead, I'd done this. I could have been caught. I could have been seen. Stupid. Incredibly stupid. If I hadn't heard the guard's arrival when I did, I might have killed him. Murdering an innocent man in a moment of panic? Harry would never approve. And it would have been messy. So unpleasant. Of course, I wasn't completely in the clear. The guard could still drive past and jot down my license plate. I had risked everything I'd so carefully built. For what? A messy, dramatic kill? Shame on me. Deep in the darker corners of my mind, a quiet voice echoed, "Oh yes, shame," and the familiar tisk-tisk of disapproval. I took a deep breath and looked at my hand, resting on the steering wheel. But also, what a thrill, wasn't it? Wild, alive, full of strange new feelings and deep disappointment. A brand new experience. That odd sense that it was all leading somewhere. Somewhere important. New, yet strangely familiar. Something I absolutely needed to It wouldn't matter. Even if she offered some incisive observations about my character flaws. It was irritating to waste energy listening when I had much more important things to think about. Especially since I was still wondering what I had meant to do, but didn't. With dear, departed Mr. Jaworski. That rudely interrupted crescendo had stirred so many new things. They needed my best cognitive effort. I needed to think, to reflect, to understand where it was all leading. And what it had to do with the other artist out there. The one hiding behind me, challenging me with his work. With all those things I needed to think about, how could I possibly need Rita right now? But of course, I would go. And obviously, it can serve a humble little purpose if I ever needed an alibi for my little adventure with the janitor. What? Detective, do you actually think Besides, I was in the middle of an argument with my girlfriend. Well, ex-girlfriend, actually. Because I had no doubt in my mind that Rita simply wanted to... What's the phrase we all use nowadays? Vent? Yes, Rita wanted me to come over so she could unload emotionally on me. She had some key personality flaws of mine she needed to point out in a wave of feeling, and my presence was absolutely essential. So I took another minute to clean myself up. I swung back through Coconut Grove and parked on the far side of the bridge, crossing the canal. Beneath it, a deep canal flowed. I pulled a few large chunks of coral from the roots of some trees by the bank, stuffed them into the bag containing the mask, gloves, and knife, and tossed it into the middle of the canal. I made another stop at a small dark park close to Rita's house and cleaned up carefully. I needed to appear just clean and presentable enough to show up as the semi-official excuse for a woman's emotional explosion. But imagine my surprise when I rang her doorbell a few minutes later. She didn't fling the door open and start throwing things or yelling at me. In fact, the lady of the house opened the door slowly and cautiously, hiding half her body behind it, as if terrified, of what might be waiting on the other side. Considering it was me she was waiting for, this showed rare good judgment. "Dexter," she said, gently, hesitantly, as if unsure she even wanted me to answer. "I didn't think you'd come, but here I am," I said reassuringly. She didn't respond for a much longer time than social grace should allow. Finally, she nudged the door open a little wider and said, "Would you like to come in, please?" If her uncertain, downcast voice, so unlike any tone I'd ever heard her use, was surprising, then imagine how stunned I was by her outfit. I believed it was called a robe, or maybe a nightgown, since it obviously didn't use much fabric in its construction. Whatever it was called, she was definitely wearing it. And as odd as the idea sounded, I believed the scanty garment was meant for me. "Please," she repeated. A bit much, really. I mean, what exactly was I doing here? I had just finished a rather unsatisfying experiment with the janitor, with faint grumbles of disapproval still echoing from the back seat. A quick situational assessment showed I was stuck between Dear Deb and the dark artist, and now I was apparently expected to do something deeply human here. Such as what exactly? Surely she didn't mean. I mean, was she crazy for me now? What on earth was going on here? And why was it happening to me? "I sent the kids to the neighbors," Rita said, closing the door with a bump of her hip. I stepped inside. I could think of many ways to describe what happened next, but none seemed quite right. She walked over to the couch. I followed. She sat down. So did I. She looked around nervously, squeezing her hands. She seemed to be waiting for something, and since I wasn't exactly sure what, I found my mind drifting back to my unfinished work with Jaworski. If only I had just a little more time. Just imagine what I could have done. While lost in those thoughts, I gradually realized Rita had begun crying quietly. I stared at her for a moment, trying to push away the image of the neatly skinned janitor, spotless and precise. I swear, on my life, I didn't understand why she was crying. But since I had practiced long and hard at mimicking humanity, I knew I was expected to comfort her. I leaned toward Rita and put one arm around her shoulder. "Rita," I said, "come on now, come on." Not exactly an Oscar-winning performance, but it was the product of well-researched technique. And it worked. Rita collapsed forward, burying her face in my chest. I wrapped my arm around her, an action that brought my hand back into view. Not an hour earlier, that same hand had been holding a boning knife over the little janitor. The thought made me dizzy. I honestly don't know how it happened, but it did. One moment, I was comforting her, saying, "Come on now, come on," staring at the sinews in my hand, feeling the memory pour through my fingers, the rising tide of power and brilliance as the knife explored Jaworski's abdomen. And the next moment, I believe Rita looked up at me, I'm fairly certain I looked back, but somehow, what I saw wasn't Rita. It was a pile of neatly arranged limbs, free of blood. It wasn't Rita's hand I felt on my belt buckle. It was the unsatisfied chorus of the dark passenger rising inside me. And a few moments later, so there it was. Something I still couldn't quite believe had actually happened. I mean, right there, on the couch. How could that possibly have happened? By the time I crawled into my little bed, I was exhausted. Normally, I didn't need much sleep, but tonight felt like it might require 36 solid hours. The dizzying events of the evening, a whirlwind of far too many new experiences. It was all just so tiring. Even more exhausting than Jaworski. That little wet mess, obviously. But I had burned through a month's supply of adrenaline in just one intense evening. I couldn't even begin to think about the meaning of any of it. From the strange compulsion to rush into the night so wildly and crudely, to the completely unthinkable thing that had happened with Rita. I'd left while she was still sleeping, and she seemed much happier. But poor dark little Dexter was once again left clueless. And the moment my head hit the pillow, I was out cold. And there I was again, outside, flying over the city like a boneless bird, floating, gliding, cold air whipping around me, pulling me, dragging me down to where moonlight shimmered on the water, and then into the cramped, cold kill room, where the little janitor looked up and laughed, arms and legs spread under the blade, laughing, distorting his face to make the laugh come out. Now he was no longer Jaworski, but a woman, and the man holding the knife looked up at me as I floated above the swirling red guts. And when that face lifted toward mine, I could hear Harry outside the door, and so I turned away before I could see who was lying on the table. But I woke with a jolt. The pain in my head felt like it could split a cantaloupe in half. It didn't feel like I'd slept at all, but the clock beside the bed said it was 5:14 a.m. Another dream. Another long-distance call through my haunted phone line. No wonder I'd spent most of my life flatly refusing to have dreams. They're so stupid, those overly obvious symbols, meaningless. A tangled mess of uncontrollable anxiety, pure nonsense. And it annoyed me deeply. Now I couldn't fall back asleep, thinking about those images of the children. If I had to dream, why couldn't it at least be more like me, interesting and different? I sat up, rubbing my temples. That awful, dull unconsciousness faded like a weakening sinoatrial node, and I sat on the edge of the bed, groggy and dazed. What was happening to me? Why couldn't it happen to someone else? The sinoatrial node, Keith Flack node, located at the junction of the superior vena cava and the right atrium, is the heart's natural pacemaker, generating about 70 to 78 beats per minute in humans. This dream felt different, and I wasn't sure what exactly was different about it, or what it meant. Last time, I had been absolutely certain another murder was going to happen, had even known where. But this time, I sighed and shuffled into the kitchen for a drink. The Barbie head went clack, clack as I opened the fridge. I stood there, staring, and drank a tall glass of cold water. The bright blue eyes stared back, unblinking. Why had I dreamed? Was it just the stress of last night's adventures bouncing back from my battered subconscious? I'd never felt stress before. Not really. It had always been a release. Of course, I'd also never come quite so close to disaster before. But why dream about it? Some of the imagery was painfully obvious. Jaworski, Harry, the faceless man holding the knife. And why now? Why plague me with all this freshman-level psychology? Why plague me with a dream at all? I didn't need it. I needed rest. And instead, I was in the kitchen, fiddling with a Barbie head. I flicked it again. Clack, clack. But now that I thought about it, what did the Barbie doll mean? How was I supposed to interpret it in time to salvage Deborah's career? How was I supposed to fend off LaGuerta when she clung to me like a hungry tick? For heaven's sake, if such a thing even existed, why did Rita have to do that to me? It all suddenly felt like some cheap, tangled soap opera that had gone way off the rails. I found some aspirin and leaned against the counter as I chewed 3 of them. I didn't care much for the taste. I'd never liked any drug, unless it served a practical purpose, especially since Harry died. Chapter 16. Harry didn't die quickly, nor did he die easily. He went through a long, terrible time of his own. The first and last selfish thing he ever did in his life. Harry died over the course of a year and a half, slipping in and out of comas for weeks at a time. Then, waking up almost normal again, leaving us dizzy with guessing. Was this finally it? Or had he beaten the disease completely? We never knew. But because it was Harry, giving up seemed ridiculous to us. Harry always did the right thing, no matter how hard it was. But with death, what did the right thing even mean? Was it right to fight fiercely, to hang on, and make us suffer through a never-ending death when death was inevitable anyway? Or was it right to go gracefully, quietly? At 19, I definitely didn't know the answer, even though I knew more about death than most other pimply sophomores at the University of Miami. One beautiful fall afternoon, after chemistry class, as I was walking across campus toward the student union, Deborah appeared beside me. "Deborah," I said, in what I thought was a very collegiate tone. "Come grab a Coke." Harry had told me I should hang out at the student union and drink Coke. He said it would help me blend in with humanity and learn how people acted. And of course, he was right. Despite what it did to my teeth, I learned a great deal about annoying types of people. 17-year-old Deborah, already way too serious, shook her head. "Dad," my sister said. Moments later, we were in the car, speeding across town to the hospital where they'd brought Harry. And hospitals were never good news. That meant the doctors were saying Harry was ready to die. and reprimanding, he cooperate. Harry didn't look good when we arrived. He was pale and motionless on the bedsheet. So still, I thought we had arrived too late. He was shrunken and hollowed out from the long fight, as if something inside him had been eating him alive. The respirator beside him hissed faintly, like Darth Vader echoing out of a living grave. Technically, Harry was still alive. "Dad," Deborah said, taking his hand. "I brought Dexter." Harry opened his eyes, turned his head toward us, almost like an invisible hand had pushed it across the pillow. But those weren't Harry's eyes anymore. They were dull blue hollows, blank, empty, lifeless. Harry's body might still be breathing, but he was no longer inside it. "Not good," the nurse said to us. "We're just trying to keep him comfortable now." She was busy with a large syringe she had picked up from a tray, drawing in medication, then holding it upright to tap the air bubbles out. "Wait." The voice was so faint at first, I thought it was the sound of the respirator. I looked around the room and finally locked eyes on what was left of Harry. Behind the vacant fog of his eyes, a tiny spark flared to life. "Wait," he repeated, tilting his chin slightly toward the nurse. She didn't hear him, or decided to ignore him. She stepped closer, gently lifting his bony arm. She began to swab his skin with alcohol. "No," Harry whispered, so faintly it was almost inaudible. I looked at Deborah. She stood still, clearly unsure of what to do. I turned back to Harry. His eyes were locked onto mine. "No," he said, and now there was something dangerously close to horror in his gaze. "No, injection." I stepped forward and put my hand out to stop the nurse, just as she was about to insert the needle into Harry's vein. "Wait," I said. She looked up at me, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. I almost stepped back in shock. It was a flash of cold, inhuman madness. The "I want" instinct. A belief that the world was her playground. Just a blink of a moment, but I was absolutely certain. She wanted to jam that needle into my eye for stopping her. She wanted to drive it into my chest, twist until my ribs shattered and my heart popped out into her hands so she could squeeze it, rip it free. She was a monster, a hunter, a killer, a predator, but demon, just like me. But her sweet smile returned almost instantly. "What's the matter, honey?" she asked, with the perfect sweetness of a nurse supreme. My tongue felt 3 sizes too large for my mouth, and it seemed to take me several minutes to answer. But eventually, I got the words out. "He doesn't want the injection." She smiled again, something beautiful lighting up her face, like a blessing from an almighty God. "Your father is very weak," she said. "He's in a lot of pain." She held up the syringe, and a shaft of blinding light from the window hit it just right. The syringe glinted like her own personal holy grail. "He needs this injection," she said. "My father doesn't want it," I said. "He's in pain," she explained. Harry said something I couldn't hear. My eyes stayed locked on the nurse, hers locked on mine. 2 monsters standing beside the same prey. Without looking away, I leaned down beside him. "Father wants the pain," Harry said. His words made me glance down. Beneath the skin-stretched bones, beneath the hair that now looked too big for his head, Harry had returned, fighting desperately to push through the haze. He nodded and slowly reached out to grasp my hand. I looked back at the final nurse. He wants the pain, I told her, and somewhere in the slight crease of her brow, in the petty tilt of her head, I could hear the growl of a predator, forced to watch its prey slip down a hole. "I'll have to speak to the doctor," she said. "Of course," I replied. "We'll be here." I watched her glide out into the hallway like a large, deadly bird. I felt pressure tighten around my hand. Harry was watching me as I watched the nurse. "You can see," Harry whispered. "The nurse?" I asked. He closed his eyes and gave a single nod. "Yes," I said. "I can." "Like you," Harry said. "What?" Deborah asked. "What are you two talking about? Dad, are you okay? What does that mean, like him?" "She likes me," I said. "Dad thinks she has a little crush on me, Deb," I told her, and turned back to Harry. "Oh, sure," Deborah muttered, but I was focused entirely on Harry. "What did she do?" I asked him. He tried to shake his head, but could barely move. My foster father winced. I could see the pain returning, just as he wanted it to. "Too much," he said. "She gives too much." He gasped now and closed his eyes. That day, I must have been very naive, because I didn't immediately understand. "Too much of what?" I asked. Harry opened one eye, glazed with pain. "Morphine," he whispered. It felt like a bright spike of light drove through my skull. "Overdose," I said. "She's killing people by overdose. In a place like this, where that's practically her whole job, no one would even question it. Why, that..." Harry squeezed my hand, and I stopped rambling. "Don't let her," he said, his voice hoarse but unexpectedly strong. "Don't let her inject me again." "Please," Deborah said, nearly losing her patience. "What are you two even talking about?" I looked to Harry, but he had closed his eyes again as another wave of pain overtook him. "Dad thinks that, I started to say, then stopped. Of course, Deborah had no idea what kind of person I was, and Harry had firmly insisted I never let her know. So how could I explain this without revealing something that could cause serious trouble? "Dad thinks the nurse has been giving him too much morphine," I finally said, deliberately. "That's insane," Deb said. "She's a nurse." Harry looked at her, but said nothing. Honestly, I had no idea how to address Deb's profound innocence. "What do I need to do?" I asked Harry. He looked at me for a long time. At first, I thought maybe the pain had clouded his mind. But when I looked again, I saw that Harry was still there. His jaw clenched so tightly, I thought the bones might punch through his pale, fragile skin. But the eyes were bright, sharp as ever, just like when he first offered me the Harry solution to help me find balance. "Stop her," he said at last. A rush of excitement surged through me. Stop her? Could it be? Did he actually mean stop her? Until now, Harry had helped restrain my dark passenger, offering it lost puppies and roadkill. And once taking me along on a glorious night to trap a vicious monkey that had terrified a whole area in South Miami. That time had been close, almost human, but still not quite right. Of course, we had gone through all the theories of stalking prey, eliminating traces, etc., etc. Harry knew the day would come and wanted me prepared to do it right. He had always kept me from actually doing it. But now, stop her? Could that really be what he meant? "I'm going to speak to the doctor," Deborah said. "He'll tell her to adjust Dad's dose." I opened my mouth to speak, but Harry squeezed my hand and gave a small, strained nod. "Go," he said. And Deborah looked at him for a moment before heading off to find the doctor. Once she was gone, the room sank into a silence that felt wild and untamed. I couldn't think about anything except what Harry had said. Stop her. I couldn't imagine any other way to interpret it. He had finally set me free, finally allowed me to do it for real. But I didn't dare ask if that was truly what he meant, afraid he would say something else entirely. So I just stood there for what felt like the longest stretch of time I'd ever experienced, staring out through the small window at the garden beyond, where a bed of red flowers encircled a fountain. Time passed. My mouth was dry. "Dexter!" Harry finally spoke. I didn't answer. I couldn't think of anything that seemed appropriate. "Like this," Harry said painfully, and I snapped my head down to look at him. He gave me a weak, lopsided smile, as if he'd just realized I was the last one left by his side. "I'm going soon," Harry whispered. "I couldn't stop you before from being what you are. What I really am, Dad," I said. He waved it off with a frail, trembling hand. "Sooner or later, you'll need to do it to a person," he said, and the thought that sparked in my mind sent a shiver down my spine. "A person who needs it, like the nurse," I said cautiously. "Yes," he said, closing his eyes for a long moment, and when he continued, his voice was twisted with pain. "She needs it, Dexter. He exhaled a broken breath. I could hear his tongue clicking as if his mouth were dry. "She deliberately gives patients overdoses, kills them on purpose. She's a killer, Dexter. A killer." I cleared my throat, feeling slightly dizzy and lightheaded. But after all, this was a very significant moment in my life. "Do you want me to?" I began, and paused as my voice cracked. "Is it okay if I stop her, Dad?" "Yes," Harry said. "Stop her." For some reason, I felt the need to be absolutely sure. "You mean, like I did with, the monkey?" Harry's eyes were shut, clearly pulled under by a new tide of pain. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. "Stop the nurse," he said, "like the monkey." His head tilted back slightly, breathing quicker now, but still labored. All right, this was it. Stop the nurse like I did the monkey. There was something savage in that. But in the whirring chaos of my mind, it all rang like music. Harry had given me freedom. I was allowed. We had talked about this day coming, but he had always held me back. Until now. Now, we talked about this, Harry said, eyes still shut. You know what to do. I've told the doctor, Deborah said, rushing back into the room. He's going to adjust Dad's medication chart. Good, I said, feeling something rising in me, starting from the base of my spine and shooting up to the top of my head. A crackling charge wrapping around me like a dark cloak. I'll go have a word with the nurse. Deborah looked stunned. Maybe because of my voice. Dexter, she said. I stopped, trying to control the wild exhilaration bubbling up inside me. I don't want any misunderstandings, I said. My voice sounded strange, even to me. I walked past her before she could really take in my expression. Out in that hospital hallway, slipping between pristine, crumpled white linens, I felt, for the first time, the dark passenger take the wheel. Dexter became secondary, almost invisible. Faint stripes on the hide of a sharper, unseen tiger. I merged with it, nearly undetectable. But I was there, and I was hunting, gliding on the wind in search of my prey. In that moment of pure freedom, on the path to doing it for the first time, sanctioned by the great Harry himself, I receded into the shadows of my darker self, while another version of me surged forward, roaring. I could finally do it, the thing I was born to do, and I did. Chapter 17. I did it. It's been a long time, but the memory is still vivid within me. Of course, I still keep that very first dry drop of blood on the slide reserved for it. That was the first time, and I can conjure up that memory at any moment by taking out that little slide and looking at it. I still do that quite often. That day was a very special one for Dexter. The final nurse became the first playmate. She opened up so many wonderful doors for me. I learned a lot, discovered countless new things. But why am I thinking about the final nurse now? Why does this whole chain of events seem to throw me back through time? I can't allow myself the luxury of a tender memory about my first pair of long pants. I need to burst into action, make grand decisions, begin important exploits, instead of foolishly wandering down memory lane, drowning in the sweet nostalgia of my first blood slide. Now that I think about it, I suddenly realize that it's the one thing I forgot to collect from Jaworski. Just a tiny, ridiculous detail. The kind of thing that turns decisive men into twitchy neurotics, pacing and fretting. I need that slide. Without it, Jaworski's death becomes meaningless. This whole silly episode now feels worse than a foolish, impulsive blunder. It's unfinished. I don't have the slide. I shook my head frantically, trying to connect two neurons to the same synapse. I half wanted to leap into my skiff for an early morning ride. Maybe the salt air would blast the stupidity out of my skull. Or I could head south to Turkey Point and hope the radiation would transform me back into something sensible. But instead, I went to make coffee. No slide, just that. Made the entire experience feel poor. Without the slide, I might as well have stayed home. Or close enough, anyway. there were other rewards. I smiled foolishly, remembering the symphony of moonlight and muffled screams. Oh, what a crazy little monster I am. An experience unlike any other I've had. It's nice to break routine now and then. And there was Rita, of course. But I had no idea what to think about that, so I didn't. Instead, I thought about the gentle breeze wafting over the small man who liked hurting children as he writhed. It was almost a happy time. But of course, 10 years from now, the memory will fade, and without that slide, I won't be able to relive it. I need my trophies. Well, we'll see. While the coffee brewed, I checked the paper, more out of hope than expectation. Papers rarely arrived before 6:30. On Sundays, they often didn't show until after 8. Yet another glaring example of the social decay that used to worry Harry. Really, think about it. If you can't deliver my newspaper on time, how can you expect me to refrain from killing? No paper, not a big deal. The press's take on my adventures has never truly interested me. Harry had warned me of the stupidity in keeping any kind of records. He didn't need to. I almost never even skimmed the write-ups of my performances. This time was slightly different, of course, since I'd been so impulsive and was a little worried I hadn't cleaned up properly. I was just curious to see what people might say about that little spontaneous adventure. So, I sat down with my coffee for about 45 minutes until I heard the newspaper thump against the door. I brought it in and opened it up. For all the many things that can be said about reporters, and there are enough to fill an encyclopedia, they are rarely troubled by memory. The very paper that recently screamed, "Parking lot killer caught," now wailed, "Tale of the melting man." It was a long and dramatic article, lovingly written, describing in detail the discovery of a horribly mutilated body at a construction site near Old Cutler Road. A spokesperson for Metro Miami Police, meaning Detective LaGuerta, I'm sure, said it was too early to say anything definitive, but it was likely a copycat crime. The article drew its own conclusions, which reporters rarely shy away from, loudly wondering if the dearly arrested Daryl Earl McHale was actually the killer, or was the real murderer still at large, as this latest morally shocking act seemed to prove. Because the article pointed out carefully, how could we believe two killers would strike at the same time? The argument was well made. I thought if people applied the same effort and intellect to solving murders, everything would have been wrapped up by now. Still, all in all, it was an entertaining article. It certainly gave me pause. God help us. Could the real monster actually still be free? Was anyone safe? The phone rang. I glanced at the wall clock. 6:45. It could only be Deborah. "I'm reading the article," I said into the phone. "You said it would be a bigger deal," Deborah said to me. "And messier." "It's not?" I asked innocently. "The victim wasn't even a hooker," she said. "A part-time janitor at Ponce Middle School, chopped to bits at a construction site on Old Cutler." "What the hell, Dexter? You know I'm not perfect, right, Deborah? It doesn't even match the MO. What happened to the freezing cold you said would be there? What about the tight space? This is Miami, Deb. People steal everything. It's not even a copycat, she said. It doesn't match any of the other killings. Even LaGuerta saw that. She said so in the article. For fuck's sake, Dexter. I've got my ass out in the wind here. It's just random violence or a stupid drug thing. Blaming me for all that seems a little unfair. For fuck's sake, Dex, Deborah said, and hung up. The morning TV news gave the gruesome chopped-up corpse a full 90 seconds. Channel 7 picked some of the best adjectives. But no one knew much more than the paper did. The outrage and gloom carried over into the weather forecast. Though, that was probably due to the lack of photos. Another beautiful Miami day. Severed bodies and a chance of afternoon showers. I got dressed and went to work. Would you like me to continue translating the next part of the novel? I raised the white paper bag and bowed slightly. Boss, I bring offerings. May the Buddha bless you, Grasshopper. What's in here? I tossed the bag at him. It hit him square in the chest and dropped to the floor. Too bad for ninja training, I said. My finely tuned body needs coffee to function, Vince said as he bent to pick it up. What's in here? Ouch! He peered inside, frowning. This better not be body parts. He pulled out the giant cinnamon roll and examined it. Oh, hell yeah. The village will not starve this year. We are all most grateful, Grasshopper. He bowed with exaggerated grace, raising the pastry high. A debt repaid is a blessing upon us all, my child. In that case, I said, do you have the file on the body they found near Old Cutler last night? Vince took a huge bite of the cinnamon roll. His lips glistened with grease as he chewed leisurely. He said, then swallowed. Feeling left out, are we? If by we you mean Deborah, then yes, I said. I told her I'd glance through the file for her. Oh, he mumbled around a mouthful. Uth neath an ith a muth. Pardon me, boss, I said. Your dialect is unfamiliar. He chewed and swallowed. I said at least this time there was plenty of blood, but you're still red-tagged. Bradley caught the call this time. Can I take a look at the file? He took another bite. Hermuth, a sin. I'm sure that's true. And what would that be in English? Vince swallowed. I said he was still alive when his legs were cut off. People are remarkably resilient, aren't they? Vince stuffed the pastry in his mouth and grabbed the file, handing it over to me while taking another big bite. I took the file. I've got to go, I said, before you try to say anything else. He dropped the pastry from his mouth. Too late, he said. I slowly returned to my tiny corner, glancing over the contents of the file. Gervasio Cesar Martez had discovered the body. His statement was right on top. He was a security guard working a contract for Sago Security Systems. He had been with them for 14 months and had no criminal record. Martez found the body at approximately 10:17 p.m. and immediately conducted a quick sweep of the scene before calling the police. He had wanted to catch the bastard who did this, because no one should be allowed to do things like that, especially not while he, Gervasio, was on duty. As if they had done it to him personally, you know? So he'd wanted to catch the monster himself. But he couldn't. No sign of the perp anywhere. So he called the cops. The poor guy had taken it as his personal responsibility. I shared his outrage. Atrocities like that should not be tolerated. Of course, I was also grateful that his sense of honor had given me time to escape. So there you go. I always thought morality was pointless. I turned down the hallway toward my small, dark room and ran straight into Detective LaGuerta. "Oh dear," she said. "You don't look so good." She didn't move. "I'm not a morning person," I said. "My circadian rhythms don't kick in until noon." She looked up at me from an inch away. "They look fine to me," she quipped. I edged past her to get to my desk. "How can I contribute to the cause of justice this fine morning?" I asked. She stared at me. "You have a message," she said, "on your voicemail." I looked over at the answering machine. Sure enough, the light was blinking. The woman was a detective. "Some girl," LaGuerta said. Sounded sleepy and happy. "You got a girlfriend, Dexter?" There was a strange, almost challenging edge in her voice. "You know how it is," I said. "Women today are very forward. And when you're as handsome as I am, they just throw themselves at you." Probably not the best choice of words. I couldn't help but think of the woman's head that had been thrown at me not long ago. "Careful," LaGuerta said. "Sooner or later, one of them's going to stick to you." I wasn't sure what she meant, but the image was unsettling. "I'm sure you're right," I replied. "Until then, carpe diem." "What?" "It's Latin," I said. "It means complain during the day." "What did you find out about last night's case?" she asked suddenly. I held up the file. "Just looked it over," I said. "Not the same guy," she said, frowning. "No matter what those sleazy reporters say, Mikhail is guilty. He confessed. This one's different. I suppose it's just a coincidence," I said. "Two brutal killers at the same time." LaGuerta shrugged. "This is Miami. What do they expect? This is where the bad guys come to vacation. There's a ton of them out there. I can't catch them all." Honestly, she couldn't catch any of them unless they jumped out of a building and landed on her hood. But this probably wasn't the time to mention that. LaGuerta stepped closer, tapping her dark red fingernail on the file folder. "I need you to find something in there, Dexter. Something that proves it wasn't the same killer." A light went on. She was under pressure, probably from Captain Matthews, a man who believed everything he read in the paper, as long as they spelled his name right. She needed ammo to push back. "Of course it wasn't the same killer," I said. "But why come to me?" LaGuerta stared at me with narrowed eyes, a curious expression. I'd seen a look like that in the movies Rita dragged me to, but why Detective LaGuerta was giving me that look was anyone's guess. "I kept you on the 72-hour follow-up team," she said. "Even though Dokes wants to strangle you, I kept you on. Thanks a lot. Because sometimes you get a feeling about these things. Serial killers. That's what everyone says. Dexter sometimes just knows." "Oh, really?" I said. "Just a couple lucky guesses. And I need someone in the lab who can find something." "Why not ask Vince?" "He's not that good," she said. "You found something before." She was still close. Too close. I could smell her shampoo. "I'll find something," I said. LaGuerta jerked her chin toward the answering machine. Are you going to call her back? You won't have time to chase after all those kitty cats. She still hadn't stepped back, and it took me a moment to realize she was talking about the message on my machine. I offered her my very best social smile. I think they're the ones chasing me, Detective. Huh, you might be right about that. She stared at me for a moment, then turned on her heel and walked away. I don't know why, but I watched her go. I honestly couldn't think of anything else to do. Just before she rounded the corner and disappeared from view, she smoothed her skirt around her hips and looked back at me. Then she vanished, returning to the vague mysteries of interdepartmental maneuvering at Homicide. And me? Poor dumbfounded Dexter? What else could I do? I slumped into my chair in the lab and pressed the button on the answering machine. Hi, Dexter. It's me. Of course it was. And strange as it may be, that slow, slightly creaky voice that sounded like me was actually Rita. I've been thinking about last night. Call me, gentlemen. Just as LaGuerta had noticed, she sounded tired and happy. It appeared that I now had a real girlfriend. Where would the madness end? Chapter 18. For quite a while afterward, I just sat there, reflecting on the cruel ironies of life. After so many years of solitary self-reliance, I was suddenly being pursued from every direction by women brimming with desire. Deb, Rita, LaGuerta, they all seemed unable to exist without me. And yet the only one I truly wanted to spend meaningful time with kept slipping through my fingers, leaving nothing but a Barbie doll in my refrigerator. Was there any justice in that? I slipped my hand into the zippered pouch and felt the tiny glass slide, resting safely inside. For a moment, it brought me a small sense of relief. At least I had accomplished something. After all, the only true requirement of life is to care about something. And I certainly did right now. Care barely began to cover it. I would gladly trade a year of my life just to learn more about the elusive figure toying with me so elegantly. In fact, I had nearly traded more than just a year of my life in that little misadventure with our friend Javorsky. Yes, this really did matter. Were people actually saying around the office that I had a special intuition for serial killers? That was troubling. It meant my carefully crafted disguise might soon start unraveling. I had been too brilliant in too many cases. That could become a problem. But what could I do? Pretend to be stupid for a while? I wasn't even sure I knew how anymore, even after years of careful observation. Ah well, I opened the file on poor Javorsky. After an hour of reviewing it, I came to two conclusions. First, and most importantly, I was going to get away with it, despite the inexcusable impulsiveness of how it had happened. ... And second, there might be a way to get Deb involved in this case. If my sister could prove that this was the work of our unique artist, while LaGuerta clung to her copycat theory, Deb could go from someone they didn't trust to make coffee to the department's golden girl. Of course, this wasn't the same killer. But nitpicking seemed out of place right now. I knew for certain there would be more bodies discovered soon. This wasn't something to worry about. Naturally, I also needed to give the troublesome Detective LaGuerta just enough rope to hang herself with. I figured this could be managed on a more personal level. Cornered and made to look foolish, LaGuerta would surely try to blame the clueless lab tech who had fed her the wrong conclusions. Poor, bumbling Dexter. My reputation would tank. That wouldn't harm my job, of course. I was only expected to analyze blood patterns, not profile murderers. So it would expose LaGuerta's incompetence for what it was, and simultaneously elevate Deborah's credibility. It's nice when the universe aligns so neatly. I called Deborah. The next day at 1:30 p.m., I met Deb at a small restaurant a few blocks north of the airport. It was tucked in a little strip mall between an auto parts store and a gun shop. We both knew the place well, not far from the Miami-Dade Police Headquarters, and home to the best Cuban sandwiches in the world. That might sound like a small thing, but trust me, sometimes only a medianoche will do. And when that happens, Cafe Relampago is the only place to go. The Morgan family had been coming here since 1974. I genuinely felt that the idea that had struck me was cause for celebration. If not a party, then at least a moment to acknowledge that things were looking up, if only slightly. Maybe I was just feeling good after letting off some steam with our dear friend Jaworski. But regardless, I felt downright cheerful. I even ordered a batido de mamé, a uniquely flavored Cuban milkshake that tasted like a mix of watermelon, peach, and mango. Deb, of course, didn't share my unusually buoyant mood. She looked like she was staring down a particularly grumpy grouper, grim and utterly dejected. "Oh, come on, Deborah," I pleaded. "If you don't stop that, your face is going to freeze that way. People will think you're a fish. They'll definitely never think I'm a cop again," she said, "because I sure as hell don't feel like one." "Nonsense," I said. "Didn't I promise?" "You did. You also promised this would go smoothly, but you didn't say anything about the look Captain Matthews gave me." "Oh, Deb," I said. "He gave you a look? I'm so sorry." "God damn it, Dexter, you weren't there. And it's not your career swirling down the drain. I told you it would be a rough stretch, Deb." "Well, at least you were right about that. According to Matthews, I'm one breath away from suspension. But he did let you use your off hours to keep poking at the case, didn't he?" She pouted. He said, "I can't stop you, Morgan, but I'm very disappointed, and I wonder what your father would think. And didn't you say my father would never close a case with the wrong guy in prison?" She looked surprised. "No," she said, "but I thought it." "How did you know?" "But you didn't actually say it, right, Deborah?" "No," she said. I pushed a glass toward her. "Have some mamey, sis. Things are looking up." She looked at me. "You sure you're not going to get me into more trouble?" "Never, Deb. How could I?" "Well, that's a relief. Truly, sis, you have to trust me." Deb looked into my eyes for a long moment. then lowered her gaze. She still hadn't touched her milkshake, which was a shame. It was really quite good. I trust you, but I swear to God, I don't know why. She looked back up at me, a strange flicker of emotion dancing across her face. Sometimes I really don't think I should, Dexter. I gave her the most reassuring and convincing smile I could muster as a big brother. In the next 2 or 3 days, something new is going to happen. I promise. You can't know that, she said. I know I can't, Deb, but I know. I really do. Then why do you sound so excited about it? I wanted to say it was because the idea made me happy. The thought of seeing more than just spotless, bloodless wonders thrilled me more than anything else I could imagine. But of course, that wasn't something Deb could really share with me, so I kept it to myself. I'm just excited for you, naturally. She pouted. Right. I forgot, she said. But at least she took a sip of her milkshake. Listen, I said. Either LaGuerta is right, which means I'm as good as dead and ground into paste, or LaGuerta is wrong, and you're alive and whole. Still listening, little sister? Yeah, she said, far too gruffly, considering how patient I'd been. If you were a betting woman, would you put money on LaGuerta being right? About anything? Maybe fashion, my sister said. She really does dress well. The sandwiches arrived. The server slammed them down wordlessly and rudely in the middle of the table before heading back behind the counter. Still, they were damn good sandwiches. I didn't know what made them better than any other medianoche in the city, but they were. The bread was crisp on the outside, soft on the inside, perfectly balanced between pork, pickles, and melting cheese. An absolute masterpiece. I took a big bite. Deborah toyed with her milkshake straw. I swallowed my bite. Deb, if my morbid reasoning can't cheer you up, and a Relampago sandwich doesn't lift your spirits, then it's too late. You're dead. Deborah gave me a deadpan look and bit into her sandwich. It's good, she said flatly. Do I look thrilled now? The poor girl still wasn't convinced. A devastating blow to my ego. But after all, I treated her to a traditional Morgan family favorite. I had brought her great news, whether she realized it or not. If that didn't make her smile, well, come on. I couldn't do everything. Still, there was one more little thing I could do. Bait LaGuerta. Not as tasty as a Relampago sandwich, but flavorful in its own right. So that afternoon, I paid a visit to our charming detective at her workspace, a stylish little corner in a large room containing 6 such corners. Hers, of course, was the most elegant, with a few eye-catching photos of her, with celebrities pinned to her partition. I recognized Gloria Estefan, Madonna, and Jorge Mas Canosa. On her desk, across a teal leather blotter, sat a sleek green agate pen holder with a small quartz clock in the center. LaGuerta was on the phone, speaking Spanish at machine gun speed when I walked in. She glanced up in my direction, but didn't see me at first. Then, a second later, her eyes returned, this time with focus. She frowned and said, okay. Taluo, Cuban slang for hasta luego. She hung up and kept staring at me. What have you got for me? she finally asked. Good news, I told her. If that means good news, I'm willing to listen. I hooked a folding chair with my foot and dragged it over to her corner. No doubt about it, I said as I sat down. You locked up the right guy. The murder at Old Cutler was done by someone else. She just looked at me for a moment. I wondered if she really needed that long to process the information. Can you prove it? She finally asked. Without a doubt? Of course I could prove it. Without a doubt. But I wouldn't. No matter how good confession is for the soul. Instead, I tossed a file onto her desk. The facts speak for themselves, I said. There's no more question here. And of course, I was the only one who truly knew that. Take a look, I said, pulling out a carefully typed list of selected comparison points. First, the victim is male. All Mikhail's other victims were female. Second, this body was found in Old Cutler. All of Mikhail's victims were found near the Tamiami Trail. Third, this body was relatively intact and found at the location of the murder. Mikhail's victims were dismembered and dumped elsewhere. I went on, and she listened intently. The list was impressive. It had taken me hours to come up with the most ridiculously obvious differences. I had to say, I did a brilliant job. LaGuerta did hers just as well. She bought it all. Of course, she was hearing what she wanted to hear. In conclusion, I said, this new murder shows signs of revenge, possibly drug-related. The guy in custody committed the other murders. They are over. Finished. Forever. Case closed. I tossed the rest of the file onto her desk and handed her the list. She took it from me, stared at it for a while, scanning up and down several times. One side of her bottom lip twitched. Then she carefully placed it under a heavy turquoise stapler. All right, she said, adjusting the stapler to align with the blotter's edge. Good. Very good. This could be useful. She looked up at me, still frowning in concentration. Then, suddenly, she smiled. Good. Thank you, Dexter. It was an honest smile, so unexpected that if I had a soul, I might have felt guilty. She stood up, still smiling. Before I could back away, she threw her arms around my neck. I really appreciate this, she said. You made me feel very grateful. She pressed her body against mine in a way that could only be described as suggestive. Of course, nothing was going to happen. I mean, she was a public servant, even in private, like the basement of a bank. I would still have zero interest in her touching me, especially since I just handed her a rope, hoping she might hang herself with it. A scenario that's hardly romance approved. Seriously, what the hell was wrong with humanity? Was that all anyone ever thought about? Feeling dangerously close to panic, I tried to pull away. Please, detective. Call me Migdia, she said, squeezing tighter and grinding even harder. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. On the plus side, it gave me the momentum to separate from her. On the downside, she stumbled, bumped her hip on the desk, tripped over her own chair, and landed sprawled on the floor. I really need to get back to work, I stammered. Chapter 19. I jolted awake, standing in front of a sink with the water blasting. I was hit with a moment of sheer panic. Utter disorientation, heart pounding, eyelids fluttering frantically in an attempt to wake fully. This place didn't feel right. The sink didn't look right. I wasn't even sure who I was. In my dream, I had been standing in front of the sink at home, the water running. But this wasn't that sink. I had been washing my hands, scrubbing the soap in deep, scrubbing every trace of that horrible red blood off my skin, rinsing it all away with water so hot it turned my skin pink, clean, sterile. The heat felt even more scalding after the coolness of the room I had just left behind. The recreation room, the kill room, the chamber of clean and careful cuts. I turned off the water and stood there a moment, trembling, leaning against the cold metal of the sink. Everything felt too real, far too unlike any dream I had ever known. I remembered that room with perfect clarity. All I had to do was close my eyes and I could see it. I was standing over a woman, watching her mouth twist and struggle beneath the strips of duct tape binding her. Seeing the horror growing alive in her glassy eyes, watching it bloom into total despair, I felt that miraculous thrill rising in me, flowing down my arm into the knife. I raised it to begin, but it wasn't the beginning, because under the table was another one, already dry, neatly wrapped, and in the far corner, yet another woman waited her turn, engulfed in a terror so raw it seemed unlike anything I'd ever witnessed, though in some way it felt familiar. It felt necessary, an escape from all other options so pure, it washed through me with a kind of clean, ecstatic energy far more intoxicating than anything else. 3. There were 3 of them this time. I opened my eyes. In the mirror, it was me. Hello, Dexter. Dreaming again, old friend? Interesting, isn't it? 3 bodies. Really? But it's just a dream. Nothing more. I smiled at myself, pulled at the muscles in my face, but remained unconvinced. No matter how thrilling the dream had been, I was awake now, and all I had left was a sick, uneasy aftertaste and a pair of dripping hands. What should have been a pleasant mental interlude had left me shaken and off balance. I was overwhelmed with the terrifying thought that my mind had fled and left me behind to face the consequences. I thought of the 3 call girls, neatly tied and waiting, and I wanted to return to them. I thought of Harry, and I knew I couldn't. I was torn between memory and dream, unable to say which one seduced me more. There was no joy in this anymore. I just wanted my rational mind back. I dried my hands and returned to bed. But there would be no more sleep tonight for poor tormented Dexter. ... I lay there on my back, staring at the shifting shadows on the ceiling, until the phone rang at 6:45 a.m. You were right, Deb said when I answered. A wonderful feeling, I replied, doing my best to channel my usual stellar self. Right about what? Everything, Deb told me. I'm at a crime scene on Tamiami Trail, and guess what? I was right? It's him, Dexter. No doubt. And it's a lot messier. Messier how, Deb? I asked, my voice trailing into the shadows, dreading the answer. Thinking of the 3 bodies, and hoping she wouldn't say it, while knowing with a shiver that she would. Looks like multiple victims, she said. A dizzy wave swept through me, rising straight up from my gut like I'd swallowed a car battery. Still, I summoned the strength to respond in my usual brilliant tone. Great, Deb. You sound just like a homicide report. Yeah, well, I'm starting to feel like maybe someday I'll be writing one myself. I'm just glad it's not this case. This one's too weird. LaGuerta doesn't know what to think, or even how to think. What's so weird about it, Deb? I gotta go, she said suddenly. Just come here, Dexter. You need to see this. When I arrived, a crowd had already gathered 3 deep around the police tape, mostly reporters. Pushing through a crowd of blood-scenting journalists is always a pain in the ass. You wouldn't think so, because on camera, they look like clueless buffoons with eating disorders. But plant them in front of a crime scene barricade, and something miraculous happens. They become strong, aggressive, ready and able to shove anyone or anything out of their way and trample whatever's left. It's kind of like those stories of mothers lifting cars off their trapped children. Some mysterious surge of strength. And when blood hits the pavement, these frail creatures can overcome anything without even messing up their hair. Luckily, one of the uniformed cops manning the barrier recognized me. Let him through, people, he said to the reporters. Let him through. Thanks, Julio, I told the cop. There seem to be more of them every year. He smirked. Someone must be cloning them. They all look the same to me. I ducked under the yellow tape, and as I straightened up on the other side, I felt something strange. Like someone was altering the oxygen level in Miami's air. I was standing in the dirty clutter of a construction site. It looked like they were building a 3-story office building. The kind small development firms use for headquarters. As I moved carefully through the half-finished site, observing the activity, I knew this location was no coincidence. Nothing was coincidental with this killer. Everything was deliberate, calculated to create a desired effect, crafted for aesthetic necessity. We were here because it mattered. He was delivering a message, just as I'd told Deborah he would. You caught the wrong guy, he was saying. You locked up a fool, because all of you are fools. Too stupid to see the truth unless I shove your noses in it. So here, take a good look. I suppose I should have been at least a little worried. But I wasn't. It nearly drove me crazy with excitement. Like a high school girl watching the football team captain gathering the courage to ask her out. You mean me? Really? Oh, stars above, is this actually happening? Forgive me if I swoon. I took a deep breath and tried to remind myself that I was a good girl and didn't do things like that. But I knew he would, and I really wanted to go out with him. Please, Harry, because far beyond doing something exciting with a new friend, I needed to find this killer. I needed to see his face, talk to him, prove to myself that he was real and what? That he wasn't me? That I wasn't the one who had done those horrible, thrilling things? Why would I even think that? It was more than stupid. It was utterly beneath the notice of a mind as once proud as mine. Except now that the idea had truly taken shape around me, I couldn't make the thought sit down and behave. What if it really was me? What if I had somehow done all those things and didn't even know it? Of course not. It couldn't be. But I snapped awake at the sink, scrubbing blood off my hands after a dream in which I gleefully let that blood coat my hands while doing the very things I usually only dreamed about. Somehow I knew details about the murders, things I shouldn't know unless what? Take a sedative, Dexter. Start again. Breathe, you stupid creature. Breathe in the good air, exhale the bad. It was nothing. Just another symptom of the mental weakness I'd slipped into recently. I was simply aging prematurely under the pressure of this clean, tidy lifestyle I'd committed to. I had to admit, I'd experienced one or two foolish, human moments in the past few weeks. So what? That didn't necessarily mean I belonged to humanity. Maybe I was just being creative in my sleep. No, of course not. That didn't make any sense either. So, what did it mean? I'd once thought I might just be going insane, throwing away a handful of marbles. A comforting idea. But if I was willing to consider that, why not also accept the possibility that I'd committed a series of fun little mischiefs and simply didn't remember them, except in fragments of interrupted dreams? Wasn't real madness easier to accept than the unconscious? After all, it was just a heightened form of sleepwalking. Murder in your sleep. A surprisingly common condition. Why not? I often let my conscious mind take a back seat when the dark passenger went for a joyride. It wasn't that big a leap to accept that something similar might be happening now, in a slightly different form. The dark passenger had simply borrowed the car while I was asleep. What other explanation was there? That I'd been guided by celestial forces in my sleep and had somehow acted in perfect imitation of the killer's style because of a cosmic link in some previous life? Sure, that theory might work in Southern California, but in Miami, not likely. So if I walked into that half-built structure and saw 3 bodies arranged in a way that somehow made sense to me, I'd have to at least consider the possibility that I had created that message. Wasn't that more logical than believing I was committing murders in a state of unconscious denial? I had reached the landing of the building's exterior staircase. I paused for a moment, closed my eyes, leaned against the raw concrete wall. It was cooler than the air and rough to the touch. I pressed my cheek to it, feeling something between pleasure and pain. As much as I wanted to go up and see what was laid out above, I wanted just as much not to see it. Tell me, I whispered to the dark passenger. Tell me what you did. But of course, there was no answer. Just a distant, indifferent clicking of the tongue, as usual. No help at all. I felt a little lightheaded, a bit dizzy and uncertain, and I didn't like feeling that way. I took 3 long breaths, straightened up, and opened my eyes. Sergeant Dokes was staring at me from 3 feet away, just inside the stairwell, 1 foot on the first step. His face was a dark, carved mask of hostility, like a Rottweiler that wanted to rip your arm off, but was curious what you might taste like first. There was something in his expression I'd never seen on any other human face, except in the mirror. A deep, eternal emptiness that had already seen through the entire farce of human life and read the final line. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, his shiny, hungry teeth bared. "Who'd you take in there with you, huh?" The words and the tone of a man who already knew the answers pierced right through me, freezing everything inside. Why those words? What did he mean by "in there with you"? Could he possibly know about the dark passenger? Impossible. Unless Dokes knew who I really was, just like I had once known about the last nurse. The creature inside calls out when it sees one of its own across the void. Could it be that Sergeant Dokes carried a dark passenger of his own? Could that actually be possible? A homicide sergeant, a predator in the shadows like Dexter? Unbelievable. But what other explanation was there? I couldn't think of one, and for far too long, I simply stared at him. He stared back. Finally, he shook his head, still not taking his eyes off me. "One day like today," he said, "you and me." "I'll remember," I replied, with as much cheer as I could fake. "In the meantime, if you don't mind." He stood there, blocking the stairs, just glaring. But eventually he gave a slight nod and moved aside. "One day like today," he repeated as I walked past him up the stairs. The shock of that encounter snapped me right out of my self-doubting funk. Of course I wasn't the one committing the murders unconsciously. Beyond how ridiculous that idea clearly was, the thought of doing all that and not remembering it, what a criminal waste. There had to be some other explanation, something simpler and colder. Obviously, I wasn't the only one around here capable of that kind of creativity. After all, I was in Miami, surrounded by dangerous creatures like Sergeant Dokes. I hurried up the stairs, feeling the rush of excitement flood back through me, almost like I was myself again. There was a lively spring in my step, only partly because I'd escaped our charming sergeant. More than that, I was genuinely eager to see this latest assault on the community's sense of security. Pure, natural curiosity, nothing more. And I was absolutely certain I wouldn't find any of my own fingerprints. I climbed the stairs to the second floor. A portion of the framework had been set in place, but most of the floor still had no dividing walls. As I stepped off the top stair onto the main floor, I saw Angel, no relation, crouched in the middle of the room, unmoving. His elbows rested on his knees, hands cupped around his face, eyes fixed straight ahead. I stopped and stared down at him, stunned. It was one of the most striking scenes I had ever seen. A seasoned Miami forensic technician, frozen in place by what he had found at a crime scene. And what he had found was far more than noteworthy. It was the set of a gothic horror play, a vampire-themed cabaret show. Just like the place where I had dealt with Jaworski, here too was a stack of drywall wrapped in plastic sheeting. It had been pushed up against one wall and now glowed under the lights of the construction site and several investigative lamps. Atop the stack of drywall, arranged like an altar, was a portable black workbench. It had been placed perfectly center stage, lit from above, or rather to highlight what had been placed on it. It was, of course, a woman's head. In her mouth was a car's rear-view mirror, pulling her face into an expression of surprised absurdity. Above it, to the left, was a second head. A Barbie doll torso had been placed under the chin, making the head appear like a grotesquely oversized version on a tiny plastic body. On the right was the third head. It rested neatly on a slab of drywall, with the ears carefully pinned in place using screws meant for drywall. There was no blood around the display. None of the three heads had a drop of blood on them. A mirror, a Barbie, and drywall. 3 murders, clean and dry. Hello, Dexter. There was no doubt anymore. The Barbie torso clearly referenced the doll in my freezer. The mirror was from the head tossed onto the causeway, and the drywall pointed to Jaworski. Either someone had crawled deep enough inside my head to become indistinguishable from me, or that person was me. I took a slow, furious breath. I was entirely sure my feelings didn't match his, but I wanted to crouch on the floor beside Angel No Relation. I needed a moment to remember how to think, and the floor seemed like a good place to start. Instead, I found myself walking slowly toward the altar, pulled forward as if gliding on greased rails. I couldn't stop myself or even slow down. All I could do was approach, staring, focusing only on breathing in and out at the right times. Looking around, I began to realize I wasn't the only one struggling to believe what I was seeing. In all my professional work, not to mention my recreational activities, I had been to hundreds of murder scenes. Many of them had been gruesome, horrifying enough to make even me flinch. And at every one of those scenes, someone was always sipping coffee, another heading out for empanadas or pastries, someone cracking jokes or gossiping while collecting blood samples. At every one of those scenes, the team had been unshaken, as if they were competing in a church league bowling tournament. Until now. This time, the raw concrete room was engulfed in an eerie silence. Officers and technicians stood in pairs or trios, seemingly afraid to be alone, staring toward the display at the far end. If someone accidentally made a sound, everyone flinched and turned, glaring. It was so absurd, it almost made me laugh. If I hadn't been so busy staring, like all the other stiff, stunned onlookers. Had I done this? It was beautiful, in a horrifying way, of course. But still, the arrangement was perfect. Striking, bloodless, exquisite. It showed a brilliant mind and impeccable presentation. Someone had put in a lot of work to make this a true work of art. Someone with style, talent, and a twisted sense of humor. And in all my life, I had only known one person like that. Could that someone really be Dexter in the middle of a dark dream? Chapter 20. I stood as close to the display as I could without actually touching it, just observing. The small altar hadn't been dusted for prints yet. No one had done anything to it, though I assumed it had already been photographed. Honestly, I really wanted to take one of those photos home with me. Postcard-sized, full-color, bloodless. If I had done this, I was a far greater artist than even I had suspected. Even from this close, the head seemed to float in space, suspended above a lifeless earth, in a timeless, bloodless parody of heaven, severed from their bodies in the most literal sense. Their bodies. I looked around. No trace. None of the neatly wrapped bundles I had come to recognize. Just the display of heads. I stared a while longer. After a moment, Vince Masuoka slowly walked over, mouth open, face pale. "Dexter," he said, shaking his head. "Hello, Vince," I said. He shook his head again. "Where are the bodies?" Vince just kept staring at the heads for a while longer. Then he looked at me with the clueless innocence of someone who truly had no idea. "Somewhere," he said. Footsteps echoed on the stairs, pulling me out of the moment. I stepped away from the display just as LaGuerta walked in, accompanied by a carefully selected handful of reporters. Some Nick somebody, Rick Sangre from the local TV station, and Eric the Viking, a quirky but respectable newspaper journalist. For a moment, the room became busy. Nick and Eric took one look, then hurried down the stairs, hands clamped over their mouths. Rick Sangre furrowed his brow deeply, stared into the lights, and then turned to LaGuerta. "Is there power here? I'll call for a camera crew," he said. LaGuerta shook her head. "Wait for the others," she said. "I need footage," Sangre insisted. Sergeant Dokes appeared behind him. Sangre glanced back and saw no footage. Dokes said. Sangre opened his mouth, looked at Dokes for a beat, then shut it again. Once again, our charming sergeant's presence salvaged the situation. He turned around and stood watch over the display, like it was a science fair, and he was the security guard. There were muffled coughs near the door as Nick Somebody and Eric the Viking returned, gingerly making their way back upstairs, like two old men. Eric no longer looked toward the far end of the room. Nick tried not to, but his head kept drifting back toward the gruesome display before he forcefully redirected it at LaGuerta. LaGuerta began to speak. I stepped closer to listen. "I wanted you three to see this firsthand before we officially allow media coverage," she said. "But can we report it unofficially?" Rick Sangre interrupted. LaGuerta ignored him. "We don't want any wild speculation from the press about what happened here," she said. As you can see, this is a sick and bizarre crime. You could practically hear her capitalizing each word. Nick made a thoughtful sound. Eric caught the implication immediately. Wait a minute, he said. Are you saying this is a brand new killer? A completely different series? LaGuerta gave him a loaded look. Of course, it's too early to say anything for certain, she said, sounding confident. But let's be reasonable, shall we? First, she held up a finger. We've got a guy who confessed to the other murders. He's in custody. We didn't release him to do this. Second, this doesn't resemble anything I've ever seen before, does it? 3 victims, presented in an elaborate display. Got it? Sincere thanks to her for noticing. Why can't I call in my camera crew? Rick Sangra asked. Wasn't there a mirror found at the scene of another murder? Eric asked weakly, trying not to look at the display. You've identified, Nick said. His head started to turn back toward the arrangement, and he forced it again. Were the victims prostitutes, detective? Listen, LaGuerta said. Her voice carried a trace of irritation, and a quick flicker of Cuban accent surfaced for a single second. Let me explain something. I don't care if they were prostitutes. I don't care if someone found a mirror. I don't care about any of that. She took a breath, then continued, calmer now. We caught the other killer. He confessed. This is a completely new case. Understood? That's the important point. As you can see, this case is completely different. Then why were you assigned to this case? Eric asked. Quite reasonably, I thought. LaGuerta bared her shark-like teeth. I solved the last one, she said. But you're convinced this is a totally new killer, detective? Rick Sangra asked. No doubt about it. I can't share any details, but I've got forensic results to back me up. I was certain she meant me. A small, proud thrill fluttered through me. But there are similarities, aren't there? Same area, same general methods. Eric the Viking began, but LaGuerta cut him off instantly. Completely different, she said. Completely. So you're completely convinced Mikhail committed all the previous murders, and this is unrelated? Nick somebody said. 100%, LaGuerta replied. Besides, I never said Mikhail was the killer in the other cases. For a moment, the reporters forgot all about the unspoken horror. What? Nick finally blurted. LaGuerta blushed, but held firm. I never said Mikhail did it. Mikhail said he did, okay? So what was I supposed to do? Tell him to go home because I didn't believe him? Eric and Nick exchanged a look heavy with unspoken judgment. I probably would have done the same if I'd had anyone to share it with. Instead, I turned my eyes toward the head in the center of the altar. It didn't exactly wink at me, but I was certain it was just as stunned as I was. Ridiculous, Eric muttered. But Rick Sangra cut him off. Would you be willing to let us interview Mikhail? Sangra asked. On camera? We were spared LaGuerta's response by the arrival of Captain Matthews. He came up the stairs and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw our little art installation. Good Lord, he said. Then his gaze shifted to the cluster of reporters around LaGuerta. What the hell are you doing up here? He demanded. LaGuerta glanced around the room, but no one volunteered an answer. I let them in, she said at last, unofficially, off the record. You didn't say off the record, Rick Sangre objected. You just said unofficial. LaGuerta glared at him. Unofficial means off the record. Out, Matthews bellowed. Officially, on the record, out. Eric the Viking cleared his throat. Captain, do you agree with Detective LaGuerta that this is a completely new murder series? A different killer? Out, Matthews repeated. I'll answer your questions downstairs. I need footage, Rick Sangre said. Just 1 minute. Matthews jerked his head toward the exit. Sergeant Dokes? Dokes appeared, clamping a hand around Rick Sangre's elbow. This way, gentlemen, he said, in that soft, terrifying voice of his. The 3 reporters looked at him. I saw Nick somebody swallow hard. Then the trio turned silently and withdrew. Matthews watched them go. Once they were safely out of earshot, he turned to LaGuerta. Detective, he said in a venomous tone he must have learned from Dokes. If you ever pull this crap again, you'll be lucky to get a security job at a Walmart parking lot. LaGuerta went pale, then flushed red. Captain, I was only trying to... she began. But Matthews had already turned away. He adjusted his tie, smoothed the hand over the back of his head, and rushed down the stairs after the reporters. I turned back to the altar. It hadn't changed, but they were now dusting it for fingerprints. Soon it would be dismantled, analyzed piece by piece. Before long, it would be nothing but a beautiful memory. I turned and headed down the stairs to find Deborah. Outside, Rick Sangre had already gotten a camera rolling. Captain Matthews stood in the glow of lights, microphones thrust toward his chin, delivering his official statement. Our department's policy is to give lead investigators full autonomy in a case until such time as clear evidence of serious judgment errors calls for a review of the investigator's capability. We're not at that point yet, but I'm monitoring the situation closely. Given the serious implications for the community, I spotted Deborah and pushed through the crowd. She was standing at the yellow police tape perimeter, wearing her patrol officer's uniform. Nice outfit, I said to her. I like it, she said. See? I see it, I told her. I also saw Captain Matthews having a chat with Detective LaGuerta. Deborah held her breath. What did they say? I patted her arm. I think I once heard Dad use a rather colorful expression that applies here. He's reaming her a new one. You know that phrase? My sister looked surprised, then delighted. Perfect. Now I really need your help, Dex. As in the opposite of everything I've already done? I don't know what you think you've done, but it's not enough. That's totally unfair, Deb, and not nice. I mean, here you are at a crime scene, wearing a police uniform and everything. Or would you rather be in something more revealing? She shuddered. That's not what I meant. You've been hiding something since the beginning, and now I want to know what it is. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Always an uncomfortable feeling. I hadn't expected her powers of observation to be quite this sharp. Why, Deborah? Look, maybe I'm not as slick as you when it comes to charming people, but I do know that everyone's about to be very busy covering their own asses. Which means nobody is going to be doing real police work. You mean you just spotted an opportunity to finally do some yourself? Bravo, Deb. It also means I need your help more than ever. She reached out and took my hand tightly. Please, Dexy, I wasn't sure what shocked me more, Dead's sharpness, the fact that she was holding my hand, or that she had just called me Dexy. I hadn't heard her use that nickname since I was 10. Whether she realized it or not, calling me Dexy pulled us both right back into Harry's world, where family mattered most and responsibilities were just as real as decapitated prostitutes. What could I say? Of course, Deborah, I said. That was Dexy. Almost enough to make me feel like I had actual emotions. Good, she said, and immediately snapped back into work mode. A miraculous shift that I found genuinely admirable. So right now, what's the next thing we need to worry about? She asked, jerking her chin toward the second floor. The body parts, I said. As far as you know, is anyone looking for them? Deborah gave me one of her fresh from the academy cop faces. A bitter, jaded look. Far as I know, more officers have been sent out to keep the TV crews off the scene than actually do anything useful for the investigation. Good, I said. If we can find the missing body parts, maybe we can actually make some progress. Okay, so where do we look? A perfectly reasonable question. One that naturally put me at a disadvantage. I had no idea where to look. Were the torsos left behind in the kill room? I didn't think so. That would be sloppy. If he wanted to reuse the room, it would be impossible with gore lying around. All right, so I could assume the leftover meat had been taken elsewhere. But where? Or maybe a thought slowly lit up in my mind. Maybe the real question wasn't where, but why. The heads were displayed for a reason. So what was the reason for hiding the rest of the bodies? Just to conceal them? No, nothing about this killer was just. Hiding was clearly not high on his list of priorities, especially now with all the showmanship. In that case, where would he leave a pile of leftovers? Well, Deborah asked, so what's the story? Where do we look now? I shook my head. I don't know, I said slowly. Wherever he put the rest, it's part of his message. We don't even fully know what the message is yet, do we? God damn it, Dexter. I know he wants to play with us. He wants to make it clear we did something so stupid, it's unbelievable. Even if we didn't, he wants to show that he's still smarter than us. So far, he's right, she said, pulling her best dead fish face. So, wherever he dumped the rest, it's got to continue that message. That we're stupid. No, sorry, that we've done something stupid. Yeah, big difference. Come on, Deb. Keep making that face and it's going to freeze that way. It's important he's commenting on the play, not the actors. Aha, that's great, Dex. So maybe we should check the nearest theater and look for an actor covered in blood up to his elbows, right? I shook my head. No blood, Deb. None at all. That's the key point. How do you know that for sure? Because there's no blood at any of the scenes. It's deliberate. It's critical to whatever it is he's doing. This time, he's repeating important details, but commenting on what he's already done. Because we failed to notice it before. You get that? Sure, I get it. Makes total sense. So why don't we go check out the Office Depot Center? Maybe he dumped the parts in the goal net again. I opened my mouth to deliver some wonderfully intelligent retort. The hockey arena made no sense. None at all. It had been an experiment. Something different. He wouldn't repeat it. I began to explain that to Deb, how the only reason he'd go back to the arena would be if. I froze, mouth open. Of course, I thought. Perfectly natural. So whose face looks like a dead fish now? Huh? What is it, Dex? For a moment, I couldn't speak, too busy trying to wrestle my thoughts into place. The only reason he would return to the hockey arena was to show us that we'd arrested the wrong guy. "Oh, Deb," I finally said. "Of course, you were right. The arena. You were right, for all the wrong reasons. But still." "Screw the wrong reasons," my sister said, then turned and bolted for her car.